On the brutal frontier, Clara Whitlock is taken captive after her family is slaughtered in a bloody raid. Dragged across unforgiving land, she's delivered to a tribal camp and handed over to Ironhawk, a warrior whose name alone strikes terror across the territory. Clara braces herself for cruelty, for violence, for the fate she's heard whispered about in frontier towns. But instead, she meets a man cloaked in silence, a man who refuses to touch her, refuses to explain, refuses to be the monster she expected. And somehow, that terrifies her more than anything else. Follow my story to the end, hit like, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. The fire had been dead for hours, but Clara could still smell the smoke in her hair. She sat in the back of the wagon, wrists raw from the rope, watching the land change as they moved farther from everything she'd ever known. The two men up front didn't talk much. One of them, lean, weather-beaten, with a scar cutting through his eyebrow, kept glancing back at her like she might try to jump. The other one just drove, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Clara didn't plan to jump. Where would she go? Behind them, miles back, was the homestead, or what was left of it. The cabin her father had built with his own hands, the garden her mother had tended every morning before the sun came up, the small wooden cross her brother had carved for their dog when it died last winter. All of it gone. All of it ash. She closed her eyes, but that made it worse. She could see her father's face, the way his expression had shifted from confusion to terror in the half-second before the arrow hit. She could hear her mother screaming her name, could feel her brother's hand shoving her toward the root cellar, could remember the wild, desperate look in his eyes as he slammed the door shut above her. "Stay down," he'd hissed. "Don't make a sound." She'd stayed down. She'd kept quiet, even when the screaming stopped, even when the cabin above her started to crackle and groan. She'd waited in the dark, breathing through her sleeve, until the silence became unbearable, and she finally pushed the door open. That's when they found her. Not the raiders, the trappers. Two white men who'd been tracking the war party, hoping to recover stolen goods, maybe collect a bounty. Instead, they found Clara, stumbling through the wreckage of her home, covered in soot and blood that wasn't hers. "You're lucky," the scarred one had said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "They usually don't leave survivors." Clara hadn't answered. Luck wasn't the word she would have used. They'd tied her up anyway. "For your own good," they'd said. "You're in shock. Might run off and get yourself killed." That had been 3 days ago. Now they were deep in territory Clara had only heard about in warnings. The kind of place her father used to mention when he cleaned his rifle at night. The kind of place that made her mother clutch her shawl tighter and hurry the children inside before dark. The wagon hit a rut, jolting Clara forward. She caught herself with her bound hands, wincing as the rope bit into her skin. "Not much longer now," the scarred man said, still watching her. "Another hour, maybe 2. "Until what?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. She hadn't spoken in days. He exchanged a glance with the driver, then shrugged. "Until we get you where you're going." "And where's that?" "Tribal camp, up near the ridge." Clara's stomach dropped. "You're taking me to them? To the people who—" "Not the same group," the driver cut in, his first words in hours. "Different tribe altogether." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" The scarred man leaned back, fishing a piece of jerky from his pocket. "Look, girl, we found you wandering alone in the middle of nowhere. We could have left you there. We could have done worse." He bit off a chunk, chewed slowly. "This way, you got a chance." "A chance at what?" He didn't answer. The sun was starting to sink when they crested the ridge and Clara saw the camp spread out below. A collection of lodges, smoke rising from cook fires, people moving between the structures with the easy rhythm of daily life. It looked almost peaceful from a distance, almost normal. The driver pulled the wagon to a stop at the edge of the camp, and within seconds they were surrounded. Men with rifles, women with children clutched to their sides, elders with faces carved deep by sun and wind. All of them staring at Clara like she was something rare and possibly dangerous. A man stepped forward, older, with gray streaking through his long hair and a bearing that suggested authority. He spoke in a language Clara didn't understand, his tone measured but firm. The scarred trapper climbed down from the wagon, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat. "We got a trade agreement," he said, handing it over. "One white captive, as discussed." The elder examined the paper, then looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't read. He said something to the people around him, and a woman came forward, younger, with quick eyes and capable hands. She cut the ropes binding Clara's wrists, then gestured for her to get out of the wagon. Clara's legs nearly buckled when she stood. 3 days sitting had left her stiff and weak. The woman caught her elbow, steadying her, then guided her away from the wagon without a word. "Wait," Clara said, turning back to the trappers. "What happens now? What am I supposed to—" "You'll figure it out," the scarred man said, already climbing back onto the wagon. "Or you won't." They left without looking back. The woman led Clara through the camp, past curious stares and whispered conversations, to a lodge set slightly apart from the others. Larger than most, with intricate designs painted on the hide covering. The woman pulled back the entrance flap and gestured for Clara to go inside. Clara hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. But run where? She was surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her, in land she didn't know, with no supplies and no weapons and no plan. She ducked inside. The interior was dim, lit only by a small fire in the center. It took Clara's eyes a moment to adjust, and when they did, she saw him. He sat on the far side of the fire, perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Tall, even sitting down. Broad-shouldered, with long dark hair and a face that could have been carved from stone. He wore simple clothing, buckskin and beadwork, but there was nothing simple about the way he looked at her. This was Ironhawk. It had to be. Clara had heard the name before, whispered in trading posts and frontier towns. The warrior who'd led raids that left settlements burning, who could track a man across solid rock, who showed no mercy to those who crossed into his territory. Some of the stories were probably exaggerated, but standing there under his gaze, Clara found herself believing every single one. "Sit," he said. His English startled her. She'd expected many things, but not that. When she didn't move, he gestured to a spot across the fire from him. "Sit." Clara sat, keeping as much distance between them as the lodge allowed. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, she could hear voices, children laughing, the ordinary sounds of a community settling in for the night. Inside this lodge, there was only silence and the weight of Ironhawk's stare. "You have a name?" he asked finally. "Clara." It came out barely above a whisper. "Clara," he repeated, testing the shape of it. "You know why you're here?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Your people killed 4 of our scouts last month, ambushed them on neutral ground, took their horses, left their bodies for the scavengers." His tone was flat, matter of fact. "The elders wanted restitution. Your traders offered you." Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't kill anyone." "No," Ironhawk agreed. "But you're white. Your people decided that made you valuable enough to trade." He paused. "My people decided that made you valuable enough to accept. So I'm... what? A prisoner? You're my wife." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stared at him, waiting for some indication that he was joking, but his expression didn't change. "That's not..." she started, then stopped. Because what could she possibly say that would matter? "I don't understand." The agreement was clear. A woman, to replace the lives lost, to bind the peace. Ironhawk shifted slightly, the firelight catching the hard planes of his face. "You'll live here, in this lodge, as my wife." Clara felt the panic rising in her chest, hot and sharp. "And if I refuse, then you'll be turned out, alone, with nothing." He said it calmly, like he was explaining the weather. "The nearest white settlement is 40 miles south, through territory controlled by tribes that have no trade agreements and no reason to show you mercy. You'd be dead in 2 days, maybe less. So I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Ironhawk said. "Most choices just have consequences you don't like." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. This couldn't be happening. A week ago, she'd been helping her mother prepare preserves for winter, arguing with her brother about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, listening to her father read from his worn Bible by lamplight. Normal things, safe things. Now she was sitting across a fire from a man who'd just announced she was his wife, in a camp full of people who had every reason to want her dead, with nowhere to go and no way out. "I won't." she started, her voice breaking. You can't expect me to— I expect nothing, Ironhawk interrupted. His tone hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had. Something almost like weariness. You'll sleep here, on that side of the lodge. I'll sleep on this side. You'll be fed, clothed, protected. Beyond that, he shrugged. We'll see. That's it? What else do you want me to say? Clara didn't have an answer for that. Ironhawk stood, moving with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his size. There are blankets in the back, water in the skin by the entrance. If you need to relieve yourself, there's a path behind the lodge that leads to the creek. Don't wander beyond the firelight. Some of the young men are angry about the trade. They might not be as restrained as I am. He moved toward the entrance, then paused, looking back at her. You're afraid. I understand that. But you're alive, and you're under my protection now. That counts for something here. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the fire and her racing thoughts. She didn't sleep that night, couldn't. Every sound outside the lodge made her jump. Footsteps, voices, the crack of wood settling in a fire. She kept expecting Ironhawk to return, to change his mind about whatever strange mercy he'd decided to show her, but the entrance flap never moved. By the time dawn light started filtering through the hide walls, Clara's eyes were gritty with exhaustion, and her mind was spinning in useless circles. She needed a plan. She needed to think clearly. She needed— The entrance flap opened and a woman stepped inside. Not the one from yesterday. This one was older, with silver threading through her dark hair and a face that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She carried a bundle of clothing and set it down near Clara without a word. Thank you, Clara tried, but the woman just made a dismissive gesture and left. The clothing was simple. A dress made of soft hide, leggings, moccasins. All of it well-made, practical. Clara held up the dress, trying to gauge the size, and realized with a strange pang that it would probably fit her perfectly. Someone had guessed her measurements. Someone had prepared for her arrival. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of her smoke-stained, blood-spattered clothes from the homestead. The new clothing felt foreign but comfortable, and when she caught her reflection in a polished piece of metal hanging from one of the lodge poles, she barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged here. The thought made her stomach turn. Clara spent the morning alone, watching thin strips of sunlight move across the lodge floor, trying to work up the courage to step outside. Every time she reached for the entrance flap, her nerve failed. What was she supposed to do out there? Where was she supposed to go? She didn't speak the language, didn't know the customs, didn't understand the hierarchy. One wrong move and— The flap opened and Ironhawk stepped inside, carrying 2 wooden bowls. He handed one to Clara without comment and settled across the fire from her, eating in silence. The bowl contained some kind of stew, meat and root vegetables in a rich broth. Clara's stomach clenched with hunger, but she hesitated. It's not poisoned, Ironhawk said, not looking up from his own bowl. If I wanted you dead, there are easier ways. Clara took a small bite, then another. She couldn't help it. She was starving, and it was good. Better than good, actually. The kind of meal that came from someone who knew what they were doing. Who made this? She asked. My sister. Ironhawk scraped the last of his stew from the bowl with his fingers. She doesn't trust you, but she's also too practical to let you starve. Does anyone here trust me? Should they? Clara set down her bowl. I'm not a spy. I'm not a threat. I'm just— You're a symbol, Ironhawk interrupted, of the people who've taken our land, killed our families, broken every promise they've ever made. Your people have given mine every reason to hate you. He looked at her directly for the first time that morning. So no, they don't trust you. Some of them never will. And you? Ironhawk was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. I don't know you well enough to trust you, but I also don't know you well enough to hate you. That's more than most people here can say. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was something. The days began to blur together. Clara spent most of her time in the lodge, watching the light change, listening to the sounds of the camp. Ironhawk came and went without much explanation, hunting, she assumed, or meetings with the elders. He brought her food, ensured she had what she needed, but they rarely spoke beyond basic exchanges. At night, he kept to his side of the lodge, true to his word. Clara should have been grateful for that, should have been relieved. But instead, she found herself more confused than ever. This wasn't what she'd expected. The stories she'd heard, the warnings, the whispered accounts of white women taken by warriors, none of them had prepared her for this strange, careful distance. On the 5th day, Clara finally worked up the nerve to step outside. The camp was smaller than it had seemed from the wagon, maybe 30 lodges clustered around a central area where women worked at various tasks, and children ran between the structures, shrieking with laughter. The moment Clara appeared, though, the laughter stopped. Every head turned toward her. Clara froze, acutely aware of how exposed she was. One of the children, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stepped forward, her expression openly curious. She said something in her language, a question, and Clara could only shake her head helplessly. "I don't understand," she said. "I'm sorry." The girl's mother called out sharply, and the child scurried back, casting one more glance at Clara before disappearing behind her mother's skirts. Clara stood there for another moment, feeling every eye on her, then retreated back into the lodge. Her heart was pounding, and her face was hot with embarrassment and something deeper, shame, maybe, or anger at herself for being so weak. She'd survived a massacre. She'd survived being dragged across the frontier by strange men. Surely she could handle a few stares from people who had every right to be suspicious of her. But knowing that and feeling it were two different things. That evening, when Ironhawk returned, Clara was ready for him. "I need to do something," she said before he could settle in. "I can't just sit in here day after day. I'll lose my mind." Ironhawk studied her for a moment. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Work, help, something useful." Clara gestured helplessly. "I can cook, I can sew, I can—" "The women here don't need your help," Ironhawk said quietly. "They're perfectly capable on their own." "I know that. I'm not saying they aren't. I just—" Clara broke off, frustrated. "I need to be useful. I need to have a purpose beyond sitting in this lodge waiting for— I don't even know what I'm waiting for." Ironhawk was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "There's a group of children who gather near the creek in the afternoons. The elder women teach them stories, history, practical skills. If you wanted to watch, to learn, that might be acceptable." "Would they let me?" "I'll speak to my sister. She leads the teaching circle." He paused. "But Clara, if you do this, you have to understand that you're a guest at best, an intruder at worst. You can't expect them to welcome you." "I don't," Clara said quietly. "I just need to do something other than sit here feeling sorry for myself." Something flickered across Ironhawk's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. It was gone before Clara could be sure. "I'll talk to her," he said. 2 days later, Clara found herself sitting at the edge of a group of children, trying to follow a lesson she couldn't understand. The elder woman leading the session, Ironhawk's sister, she assumed, had acknowledged Clara's presence with a single sharp glance and nothing more. The children were less subtle. They whispered and pointed, giggled when Clara tried to repeat words she heard, fell silent when she met their eyes. But they didn't chase her away. Clara focused on watching, on learning what she could through observation. The woman was teaching them about plants, it seemed, holding up different leaves and roots, demonstrating preparation methods, explaining uses that Clara could only guess at from context. Medicine, probably. Food. Practical knowledge passed down through generations. One of the younger children, a boy with a gap-toothed smile, dropped the stick he'd been playing with and it rolled toward Clara. He darted forward to grab it, then paused, looking at her with wide eyes. Clara smiled, tentative, uncertain, and held out the stick. The boy snatched it back and ran to his mother's side. But before he buried his face in her skirt, Clara saw something that gave her hope. He was smiling too. It was a small thing, almost nothing really, but it was something. As the days turned into weeks, Clara found a rhythm. She attended the teaching circles when allowed, helped with small tasks that didn't require communication, gathering wood, carrying water, mending simple tears in clothing. The women didn't exactly welcome her, but they stopped glaring quite so hard. The children grew bolder, sometimes approaching her with questions she couldn't answer, laughing when she tried to respond in their language with her terrible pronunciation. And slowly, painfully, Clara began to learn. Not just the language, though that came bit by bit, word by careful word, but the rhythms of the camp, the unspoken rules, the way people moved through their days with a sense of purpose and belonging that Clara had thought she'd lost forever. Ironhawk watched all of this from a distance. He still didn't speak to her much beyond necessity, still kept to his side of the lodge at night, still treated her with that same careful, deliberate courtesy that left Clara more confused than ever. Who was this man? The stories painted him as a monster, but monsters didn't give their captives space to breathe. Monsters didn't arrange for them to learn and grow and find purpose. Monsters didn't lie awake at night. And Clara knew he was awake. She could hear it in his breathing, maintaining a respectful distance from a woman they supposedly owned. One evening, after a particularly long day, Clara gathered her courage. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked as they sat across the fire from each other. "The trade. You could have refused." Ironhawk didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames, his expression distant. "I had my reasons," he said finally. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Clara waited, but he didn't elaborate. She should have let it go. She knew that. But something in her refused to back down. Was it because you wanted a wife? Or because the elders pressured you? Or because I'm tired, Ironhawk said, and the weariness in his voice stopped Clara cold. "I'm tired of fighting, tired of watching people I care about die for land that we're going to lose anyway, no matter how many battles we win. Tired of being the weapon everyone expects me to be." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected: pain. "The elders wanted restitution. Your people wanted peace, or at least the appearance of it. And he shrugged, "I wanted to see if there was another way, a way that didn't end with more bodies in the ground." "So I'm what? An experiment?" "You're a chance," Ironhawk said quietly, "for both of us, to be something other than what everyone expects." Clara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the idea that this man, this warrior whose name was synonymous with violence, might be just as trapped as she was, just in a different way. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "What made you so tired?" Ironhawk was silent for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just as she was about to apologize for asking, he spoke. "I had a family once, a wife, a daughter." His voice was steady, but Clara could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. 3 years ago, a group of settlers burned our winter camp. We'd moved there for shelter, away from the fighting. We thought we'd be safe." He paused. "We were wrong." Clara's throat tightened. "Your wife and daughter, they didn't make it out." Ironhawk's hands tightened into fists, then slowly relaxed. Neither did 37 other people. Elders, children, people who'd never lifted a weapon against anyone. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Are you?" Ironhawk looked at her, his expression unreadable. "They were killed by people who looked like you, talked like you, prayed to the same God your family probably prayed to." He shook his head. "Everyone's sorry. Nobody changes." The words stung because they were true. Clara thought about her own father, the way he'd talk about the Indian problem over dinner, the way her mother would clutch her children closer whenever they heard rumors of raids nearby. The fear had always been painted as reasonable, justified, protection. But sitting here now, looking at Ironhawk's face and seeing the ghost of the man he used to be before grief hollowed him out, Clara understood with painful clarity that her family's fear had never existed in isolation. It was part of a cycle, round and round, with no end in sight. "You're right," she said quietly. "I can't change what my people have done. I can't bring your family back. I can't fix any of this." "Then why are you here?" "Because I don't have anywhere else to go," Clara said honestly. "But also because—" She hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Because maybe you're right. Maybe this is a chance, not to fix everything, but to do something different, to try." Ironhawk studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They didn't speak again that night, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had cracked just slightly, letting in the smallest sliver of light. And in the darkness of the lodge, lying on her side of the fire, Clara realized something that terrified her. She didn't hate it here anymore. Didn't spend every waking moment planning her escape. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she'd started to belong. The morning after their conversation, Clara woke to find Ironhawk already gone and a new dress laid out near her bedding, deep blue with intricate beadwork along the hem. She ran her fingers over the careful stitching, wondering who'd made it, wondering what it meant that someone had bothered. She was fastening the last tie when voices erupted outside the lodge, sharp and argumentative. Clara froze, straining to make out words she barely understood. One voice she recognized, Ironhawk's sister, the woman who led the teaching circles. The other was male, younger, speaking in rapid bursts that sounded more like accusations than conversation. The entrance flap snapped open, and Ironhawk stepped inside, his jaw tight in a way Clara had learned to recognize as barely controlled anger. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately, just stood there, breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. Finally he said, "Some of the younger warriors are pushing the council to revoke the trade agreement." Clara's stomach dropped. "Why now?" "Because you're learning our language, watching our children, making yourself useful." Ironhawk's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "They think you're a spy, that you're gathering information to take back to your people." "That's insane. I don't even know where my people are anymore. I know that. The elders know that. But fear makes people stupid." He moved to the back of the lodge, began gathering his weapons with sharp, deliberate movements. "There's going to be a council meeting tonight. They'll discuss it, vote on it. Until then, you need to stay inside." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Clara felt something hot flare in her chest. "So I'm a prisoner again." "You're protected," Ironhawk corrected, but his tone suggested he knew how thin that distinction was. "There's a difference. Doesn't feel like one." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "Would you rather I let you wander the camp right now? With half the young men convinced you're a threat and looking for an excuse?" When Clara didn't answer, he nodded. "That's what I thought. Stay inside, stay quiet. Let me handle this." He left before she could argue. The day crawled by. Clara paced the lodge until she'd worn a path in the dirt floor, then forced herself to sit, then gave up and paced again. Outside, she could hear the camp going about its business. Children playing, women calling to each other, the steady rhythm of normal life. But underneath it, she sensed something else. A tension. A waiting. By the time the sun started to set, Clara's nerves were strung so tight she thought she might snap. The council fire was visible through the gaps in the lodge covering, casting dancing shadows that made Clara's imagination run wild. She could hear voices, many of them, rising and falling in what sounded like heated debate. She caught her own name more than once, though the context remained frustratingly unclear. Hours passed. The fire burned lower. The voices continued. Finally, well past midnight, the entrance flap opened and Ironhawk stepped inside. He looked exhausted, older somehow, but when he met Clara's eyes, there was something else there too. Relief. "Well?" Clara asked, her voice rough from disuse. "You can stay." Ironhawk sank down by the fire, rubbing his face with both hands. The council voted. Narrow margin, but it held. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "What changed their minds?" "I did." He looked at her through his fingers. "I reminded them that the whole point of the trade was peace, that sending you back or turning you out would accomplish nothing except restarting the cycle. I told them." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I told them you weren't your people any more than our children are responsible for what our warriors do in battle." Something in Clara's chest tightened. "You stood up for me." "Don't make it into something it's not," Ironhawk said, but there was no heat in it. "I stood up for the agreement, for the principle." "Right. The principle." Clara didn't bother hiding her skepticism. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Then Ironhawk said quietly, "My sister spoke for you too, said you'd been respectful, helpful, that the children were starting to trust you." He glanced at her. "That counted for something. I should thank her." "You should be careful," Ironhawk corrected. The vote was close. Some of the warriors, particularly Redstone and his friends, they're not going to let this go easily. They'll be watching you, looking for any excuse to prove they were right about you. "So what am I supposed to do? Hide in here forever?" "No," Ironhawk said firmly. "You keep doing what you've been doing. You keep showing up, keep learning, keep proving them wrong." His eyes met hers. "But you do it carefully. No mistakes, no missteps. Understand?" Clara understood. She was walking a line so thin it barely existed, and one wrong move would send her tumbling off. No pressure. The next morning, Clara returned to the teaching circle with her head high and her stomach in knots. She could feel the stares, could sense the whispered conversations that stopped when she got too close. But Ironhawk's sister, her name was Falling Rain, Clara had finally learned, gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement, and that was enough. The children were less guarded than their parents. Within days, they were approaching Clara freely again, teaching her words in their language and laughing when she mangled the pronunciation. One little boy, the same gap-toothed child who'd dropped his stick weeks ago, began following Clara around like a shadow, chattering at her in a mix of his language and gestures when words failed. His name was Swift Rabbit, and he was exactly 7 years old, a fact he communicated with great pride using his fingers. His mother had died in childbirth with her second baby, who'd also died, and his father was one of the warriors who'd voted against Clara staying. Swift Rabbit didn't seem to care about any of that. He just wanted someone to show his rock collection to, and Clara was willing. "This one," he said in halting words she could understand, holding up a smooth black stone. "From the river, see? Shiny." "It's beautiful," Clara said, and meant it. Swift Rabbit beamed and launched into a detailed explanation of where he'd found each rock, most of which Clara couldn't follow. But she nodded in the right places and asked questions when she could, and that seemed to be enough. She didn't notice Redstone watching them until it was too late. He was young, maybe 20, with a scar across his cheekbone and eyes that never seemed to blink. He'd been one of the loudest voices at the council meeting, Clara had learned. One of the ones most convinced she was a threat. Now he stood at the edge of the teaching circle, his arms crossed, his expression cold. Swift Rabbit noticed him too and immediately fell silent, clutching his rocks to his chest. "You," Redstone said in English, pointing at Clara. "You think you belong here now?" Clara stood slowly, keeping her voice level. "I think I'm trying to be useful, that's all." "Useful?" Redstone spat the word like a curse. "You want to be useful? Go back to your people. Tell them to stop stealing our land. Tell them to honor their treaties. Tell them to stop killing our families." "I can't do any of those things," Clara said quietly. "I'm not—" "You're one of them," Redstone interrupted. "You'll always be one of them, and one day when they come for us again, and they will come, you'll show them exactly where to strike, where our children sleep, where our elders gather, where our warriors are weakest. That's not enough." Ironhawk's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stepped into the circle, positioning himself between Clara and Redstone. The council voted. "This is settled." "The council made a mistake," Redstone said, but he took a step back. "And when that mistake costs us, I'll be there to remind them who argued against it." He left without another word, but the damage was done. The other women gathered their children quickly, shooting glances at Clara that ranged from suspicious to outright hostile. Within minutes, the teaching circle had dispersed, leaving Clara and Ironhawk standing alone. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I didn't mean to—" "You didn't do anything wrong," Ironhawk said, but his tone was weary. "Redstone is angry, and he needs someone to blame. You're convenient." "What was he to you, before all this?" Ironhawk was quiet for a moment. "He was my wife's younger brother." The words landed like a stone in Clara's stomach. "Oh, he was 12 when the settlers burned our winter camp. He watched his sister die, watched my daughter die." Ironhawk's voice was carefully neutral. "He hasn't forgiven the world for that. I don't know if he ever will." Clara thought about that as they walked back to the lodge. Thought about Redstone's eyes, the way they'd looked at her with such pure hatred. He didn't see Clara Whitlock, a woman trying to survive in impossible circumstances. He saw every settler who'd ever raised a weapon against his people, every broken promise, every stolen life. How was she supposed to fight that? The answer came 3 days later, in the form of a problem Clara actually knew how to solve. She was helping Falling Rain prepare food when one of the young mothers rushed over, carrying a child who was screaming in pain. The girl, maybe 4 years old, had badly burned her arm on a cook fire. The skin was already blistering, angry red spreading up toward her elbow. The other women gathered around, offering advice in rapid voices, but the child just screamed louder, thrashing in her mother's arms. Clara didn't think. She just moved. "Cold water," she said, gesturing to the creek. "We need cold water now, and clean cloth. And she struggled for the word in their language, couldn't find it, switched back to English. Honey. Do you have honey? Falling Rain stared at her. Please, Clara said. I know how to help. My mother, she taught me. Burns like this, you have to cool them fast, keep them clean, seal them against infection. I can help, but I need those things. Now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Falling Rain barked out orders, and suddenly people were running, fetching water and cloth and a small clay jar of honey. The girl's mother looked at Clara with desperate, distrustful eyes, but she didn't pull her daughter away. Clara worked quickly, cooled the burn with water from the creek, cleaned it as gently as she could while the girl sobbed, applied honey to the worst areas, then wrapped it carefully in clean cloth. Her hands shook the entire time, but she forced them steady. Forced herself to remember her mother's voice, patient and sure, walking her through this exact process when Clara's brother had tipped a pot of boiling water onto his foot. By the time she finished, the girl had stopped screaming. She was still crying, but quietly now, exhausted. Her mother held her close, rocking her, and when she looked at Clara this time, there was something different in her eyes. Not trust exactly, but not pure suspicion either. Thank you, the woman said softly in her own language. Clara understood that much. You're welcome. Word spread fast. By evening, everyone in camp had heard about the burned child and the white woman who'd helped. Some dismissed it as luck or coincidence, but others, particularly the mothers, the ones who understood that pain and fear and relief transcended language, looked at Clara differently now. That night, Ironhawk came back to the lodge carrying something wrapped in hide. He set it down in front of Clara without a word. What's this? She asked. Open it. Inside was a small leather bag filled with various dried plants, roots, and what looked like crushed bark. Clara looked up at him, confused. Medicine supplies, Ironhawk explained. Falling Rain put it together. She said if you're going to treat injuries, you should have the proper materials. She'll teach you which plants are which, how to prepare them. He paused. If you want to learn. Clara's throat tightened. She'd do that? She's practical. The old healer died last winter and we haven't replaced her yet. If you can fill that role... He shrugged. It benefits everyone. Tell her yes, Clara said immediately. Tell her I'd be honored to learn. Something flickered across Ironhawk's face. You keep surprising people here. You know that? Is that good or bad? I don't know yet, he admitted, but it's interesting. Over the following weeks, Clara threw herself into learning everything Falling Rain would teach her. Which plants reduced fever, which ones stopped bleeding, which ones could be made into poultices for infected wounds, how to set a broken bone, how to recognize the signs of infection before it spread, how to prepare teas that eased pain or helped with sleep. Some of it Clara already knew from her mother. Some of it was entirely new, techniques and remedies that white settlements had never heard of. She absorbed it all with desperate focus, partly because it was useful, and partly because it gave her a purpose beyond just surviving. The children started coming to her with scraped knees and splinters. Then the women, tentatively at first, with headaches or sore backs or minor ailments they'd normally just suffer through. Clara treated everyone who asked, and slowly, incrementally, the hostility began to fade. Not everywhere, not from everyone. Redstone still watched her with cold eyes, still made comments just loud enough for her to hear about trusting snakes because they hadn't bitten you yet. Some of the older warriors maintained their distance, their disapproval clear, but the mothers warmed to her. The children stopped running away. And Falling Rain, though she never became warm exactly, stopped treating Clara like she was made of glass that might shatter at any moment. You're good at this, Falling Rain said one afternoon as they worked together preparing a salve. She spoke in her own language slowly enough that Clara could follow. Better than I expected. My mother was a healer, Clara said, stumbling over the words but getting them mostly right. In our settlement, people came to her when they were sick or hurt. What happened to her? Clara's hand stilled. She died when the raiders came. Falling Rain was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My mother was killed by settlers. When I was 15, they said she'd stolen a horse that wandered onto our land. Their eyes met across the work, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, maybe not ever, but understanding. Recognition that loss didn't belong to one side or the other. It just was, sharp and permanent, and impossible to argue away. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I know." Falling Rain went back to grinding herbs. "Keep working. We need 2 more jars before the sun sets." Ironhawk noticed the changes too. Clara caught him watching sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention. His expression was hard to read, thoughtful, maybe, or uncertain, like he was trying to reconcile what he'd expected with what was actually happening. One evening, after a particularly long day, he said, "You're good with the children." Clara looked up from the moccasin she was attempting to repair. "They're easier to talk to than the adults. Less complicated. Swift Rabbit follows you everywhere now." "He's a sweet kid. Talks too much, but sweet." Clara smiled despite herself. "He reminds me of my little brother, always collecting things, always full of questions." "The brother who died?" The smile faded. "Yeah." Ironhawk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Swift Rabbit's father doesn't like it. He told me to keep you away from his son." Clara's stomach sank. "And?" "And I told him that his son seems happier than he's been in months, and maybe he should consider whether his pride is worth more than that." Ironhawk's mouth quirked slightly. He didn't appreciate the observation. "You're going to make yourself enemies defending me." "I already have enemies," Ironhawk said. "At least this time it's for a reason I can respect." The words sat between them, heavy with implications Clara wasn't sure how to process. She went back to her moccasin, pretending to focus on the stitching, but her hands weren't quite steady. "Why do you do it?" she asked finally. "Defend me. Protect me. You could have an easier life if I just what? Cast you out? Let them turn you into a scapegoat for every wrong your people have ever committed?" Ironhawk shook his head. "That's not who I want to be." "Who do you want to be?" He took a long time to answer. "Someone my daughter would have been proud of," he said finally, so quietly Clara almost didn't hear it. Her chest ached. "I think she would be." Ironhawk looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time Clara saw something in his eyes that wasn't pain or weariness or carefully maintained distance. Something warmer, something that scared her almost as much as everything else combined. "You should rest," he said, breaking eye contact. "Tomorrow will be difficult. The hunting party returns, and there will be a feast. You'll be expected to attend." "Expected by who?" "By me." Ironhawk stood, moving toward his side of the lodge. "You're my wife, Clara. In name, at least. People need to see that I stand by that I'm not ashamed of you." "Are you? Ashamed?" He paused at the edge of the firelight. "No," he said simply. "I'm not." The feast was exactly as overwhelming as Clara had feared. The entire camp gathered around massive cookfires, eating and drinking and telling stories in a language Clara still only partially understood. She sat beside Ironhawk, acutely aware of every eye on her, every whispered conversation that might have been about her. Swift Rabbit appeared at some point, tugging on Clara's sleeve until she leaned down so he could whisper, well, his version of whispering, which was barely quieter than normal talking, something in her ear. She didn't catch all the words, but his excited gesturing toward the dancers told her enough. "He wants you to watch the dancing," Ironhawk translated, sounding almost amused. "He says it's the best part." Clara watched. Young men and women moved through intricate patterns around the fire, their movements telling stories Clara couldn't quite follow, but found beautiful anyway. The drums pounded, voices rose in song, and for a moment Clara forgot to be afraid, forgot to worry about who was watching her or what they might be thinking. She just watched the dance. When it ended, Swift Rabbit was practically vibrating with excitement, chattering about the dancers and the drums and how one day he'd be big enough to join them. His father appeared behind him, his expression thunderous, and grabbed the boy's arm hard enough to make him yelp. "Enough," he said in English, looking directly at Clara. "My son doesn't need a white woman's attention." "He's just a child," Clara said quietly. "I'm not trying to—" "You're trying to make us forget what you are, what your people are." Swift Rabbit's father pulled the boy closer. "But we remember. Some of us will always remember." He dragged Swift Rabbit away. The boy looked back over his shoulder, his eyes wide and confused, and Clara felt something crack in her chest. "Don't," Ironhawk said quietly, reading her expression. "You can't save all of them. You can't make everyone understand." "I know," Clara said, But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The feast continued around them, but Clara's appetite was gone. She sat there, watching the fire burn lower, wondering how long she could keep walking this impossible line between two worlds that both seemed determined to reject her. Later that night, back in the lodge, Ironhawk said, "Swift Rabbit's father lost his wife, lost his second child. He's angry and scared, and he doesn't know what to do with those feelings except lash out." "I know," Clara said again. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," Ironhawk agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in silence for a while. Then Clara said, "Do you ever think about leaving? Just walking away from all of this? Starting over somewhere nobody knows who you are or what you've lost?" "Every day," Ironhawk admitted. "But I don't." "Why not?" "Because running doesn't heal anything. It just moves the pain somewhere else." He looked at her across the fire. "You know that. You could have given up weeks ago, could have stopped trying to fit in here. But you didn't." "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice, Clara. You've just been making harder ones than most people would." He paused. "That takes strength." Clara laughed, but it came out bitter. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on." "That's what strength looks like," Ironhawk said. "Anyone can be brave when things are easy. Real courage is getting up every morning when everything in you wants to stay down." The words settled over Clara like a blanket. Not comfortable, exactly, but warm, real. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara fell asleep before the fear could catch up with her. The weeks that followed found Clara settling into a rhythm she'd never expected. She worked with Falling Rain almost daily now, learning remedies and techniques that would have made her mother proud. The children sought her out freely, and while some parents still disapproved, they didn't intervene as aggressively as Swift Rabbit's father had. She was becoming part of the community. Not fully, not without reservation, but part of it nonetheless. And Ironhawk was becoming something she couldn't quite define. Still her protector, still maintaining that careful distance at night. But during the day, he'd started teaching her things. How to identify animal tracks, how to move quietly through the forest, how to read the weather in the sky and the wind. "Why are you teaching me this?" Clara asked one afternoon as they walked through the trees surrounding the camp. "Because you should know how to survive," Ironhawk said simply. "If something happens, if you need to leave quickly, you should have the skills to keep yourself alive." "You think I'll need to leave?" He didn't answer right away. "I think it's foolish to assume anything is permanent. Better to be prepared." They walked in silence for a while, Clara practicing the quiet footwork Ironhawk had demonstrated. She wasn't very good at it yet, kept stepping on twigs that snapped loudly, but she was improving. "There," Ironhawk said suddenly, pointing to a set of tracks in the soft earth. "What are those?" Clara crouched down, studying them. "Deer?" "Good. Male or female?" She looked closer, trying to remember what he'd taught her about reading size and depth. "Male. A buck." "How recent?" That was harder. Clara touched the edge of the print carefully, feeling how firm the soil was. "This morning?" "Within the last 2 hours," Ironhawk corrected. "See how the edges are still sharp? No weathering yet." He knelt beside her, pointing out details she'd missed. "And here, the way the soil is displaced, that tells you direction and speed." Clara tried to follow, but mostly she was aware of how close he was. The warmth of his arm nearly touching hers. The way his voice dropped when he was teaching. It made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She pushed the feeling down, focusing on the tracks. When they returned to camp, Falling Rain was waiting with a worried expression. "What's wrong?" Ironhawk asked immediately. "A rider came from the western settlements," Falling Rain said, her voice tight. "They're demanding a meeting with the council. They want to discuss the trade agreement." Clara's blood turned cold. "When?" 3 days from now. Here." Falling Rain looked at Clara directly. "They're asking to see proof that you're alive and well treated." "Or what?" Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "Or they consider the agreement void," Ironhawk said grimly, "which means the peace is void, which means we're back where we started." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay on her side of the lodge, staring at the hide walls, trying not to think about what would happen in 3 days. Would the settlers demand she return? Would they bring soldiers? Would this fragile peace she'd been living in shatter completely? "You're thinking too loud," Ironhawk said from across the fire. Clara almost laughed. "Sorry." "What are you afraid of?" "Everything," Clara admitted. "That they'll take me back, that they won't, that whatever happens will start a war, that people will die because of me." She rolled over to look at him. "Take your pick." Ironhawk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When they come, you'll have a choice to make. No one can make it for you." "What choice?" "Whether to stay or go." He met her eyes across the fire. "I won't force you to remain here, Clara. If you want to return to your people, if you think that's where you belong, I'll speak for you. I'll make sure the council understands." Clara's throat tightened. "And if I choose to stay?" "Then I'll stand beside you," Ironhawk said simply. "Whatever comes after." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Clara was afraid to examine too closely. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you do that?" Ironhawk looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because somewhere along the way you stopped being a trade agreement and started being something else." "What else?" He didn't answer, just held her gaze until Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Finally, he looked away. "Get some rest. 3 days will come faster than you think." But Clara didn't rest. She lay awake in the darkness, thinking about impossible choices and the strange, terrifying warmth growing in her chest every time Ironhawk looked at her like that. 3 days later, when the settlers arrived with their demands and their suspicions and their barely concealed weapons, Clara would have to decide which world she belonged to. She already knew the answer. She just didn't know if she was brave enough to say it out loud. She was brave enough, as it turned out, but bravery didn't make the morning any easier. Clara woke before dawn, her stomach twisted in knots she couldn't untangle. Ironhawk was already up, standing at the entrance of the lodge, watching the sky lighten from black to gray. He hadn't said much since yesterday, and Clara didn't push. They both knew what was coming. "They'll be here by midday," he said without turning around. The scouts reported them camped 5 miles south. Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. "How many?" 8 men, 2 of them soldiers, judging by the uniforms. Ironhawk finally looked at her. "They're bringing a wagon, provisions for a journey, most likely, to take her back." The unspoken words hung between them. "You should eat something," Ironhawk said, gesturing to the food falling rain had left the night before. "It's going to be a long day." Clara tried, got down maybe 3 bites before her throat closed up and she had to stop. Ironhawk didn't comment, just gathered his weapons with the same methodical care he brought to everything. "What happens at these meetings?" Clara asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own racing thoughts. "The council gathers. Both sides state their positions. We negotiate, argue, try to find common ground." He checked the edge of his knife, seemed satisfied. "Usually it ends with everyone angry but willing to wait before starting a fight. And this time? This time there's you." Ironhawk slid the knife into its sheath, which makes everything more complicated. Before Clara could respond, Swift Rabbit's voice called out from outside the lodge, high and excited. Ironhawk pulled back the entrance flap, and the boy tumbled in, chattering rapidly in his own language, his eyes bright. "Slow down," Ironhawk said, but there was something almost fond in his tone. "What's so important?" Swift Rabbit launched into what sounded like a detailed explanation, gesturing wildly with his hands. Clara caught maybe 1 word in 5, but the excitement was clear enough. Ironhawk listened, then shook his head. "Not today, little one. Clara has other things to attend to." Swift Rabbit's face fell. He turned to Clara, switching to the broken mix of languages they'd developed. "You come see? I find new rocks, big ones, from the—" He gestured toward the creek, struggling for words. Clara's chest ached. "I can't right now. But later, okay? After the meeting, I promise." It was a promise she might not be able to keep, and they both knew it. Swift Rabbit's expression crumpled, but he nodded and backed toward the entrance. Before he left, though, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white stone, pressing it into Clara's hand. "For luck," he said in careful English. "My mother's. Now yours." Then he was gone before Clara could find words. She looked down at the stone, smooth and cool against her palm, and felt something break loose in her chest. This boy whose father hated her, whose people had every reason to want her gone, had just given her his dead mother's stone for luck. "He's gotten attached to you," Ironhawk observed quietly. "I know." Clara closed her fingers around the stone. "I didn't mean for that to happen. These things rarely happen on purpose." Ironhawk moved toward the entrance, then paused. "Whatever you decide today, Clara, whatever choice you make, it's yours to make. Don't let anyone take that from you." By the time the sun reached its peak, the entire camp had gathered in the central clearing. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces grave and unreadable. The warriors stood behind them, hands never far from their weapons. The women clustered with the children at the edges, watching everything with sharp, worried eyes. Clara stood beside Ironhawk, wearing the blue dress with the careful beadwork, her hair braided the way falling rain had shown her weeks ago. She'd stopped looking like a settler woman somewhere along the way. The realization should have bothered her more than it did. Redstone stood with the other young warriors, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Clara with barely disguised hostility. She could feel his anger like heat from a fire, could sense him waiting for this whole thing to collapse so he could say he'd been right all along. The settlers arrived exactly at noon. 8 men, just as the scouts had reported. 2 in Union Army uniforms, though the war had been over for years, and Clara suspected they were more about intimidation than active service. The others were frontiersmen, trappers, traders, men who made their living in the spaces between civilization and wilderness. Hard men with harder eyes. Their leader was someone Clara recognized. Thomas Brennan, a trader who'd passed through her family's settlement twice a year, bringing supplies and news from the Eastern Territories. He'd always seemed decent enough, if pragmatic in the way frontier people had to be. Now he looked at Clara like he was doing complicated math in his head and didn't like the sum. "Miss Whitlock," he said, dismounting from his horse. His gaze swept over her. The dress, the braids, the way she stood close to Ironhawk without flinching. "You look well." "I am well," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "That's good to hear." Brennan's tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "That's what we came to verify. There's been concern among the settlements, questions about whether the trade agreement was being honored in spirit as well as letter." One of the elders, Greycloud, the man who'd first accepted Clara into the camp, spoke in his own language. Ironhawk translated smoothly. "He says the agreement was honored exactly as written. One woman, delivered alive, treated with respect, integrated into our community as agreed." "Integrated," Brennan repeated, his eyes still on Clara. "That's an interesting word. Tell me, Miss Whitlock, have you been here of your own will, or have you been encouraged to stay?" The question was a trap, and Clara knew it. If she said she'd been forced, the agreement was void and soldiers would come. If she said she'd stayed willingly, she was betraying her own people in the eyes of every settler within 300 miles. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, one of the soldiers stepped forward. "Let's cut through the pleasantries, shall we?" He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of righteous anger that came from believing the world was simpler than it was. "We know how these savages operate. They take our women, break them, make them too ashamed to come home. Well, we're here now, miss. You don't have to pretend anymore. We'll protect you." Redstone snarled something that didn't need translation. Several of the younger warriors reached for their weapons. The soldiers' hands dropped to their rifles. "Everyone stop!" Claire's voice cut through the rising tension, louder than she'd intended. "Just, everyone stop!" The clearing went silent. Every eye turned to her. Claire's heart was hammering, but she forced herself to meet Brennan's gaze directly. "You want to know if I've been mistreated?" "I haven't." "You want to know if I've been forced?" "I haven't. I've been given food, shelter, clothing, and the freedom to move through this camp as I please. I've been taught skills that have made me useful here. I've been treated with more respect than I expected, and probably more than I deserved." "Then you'll come back with us," the young soldier said, like it was obvious. "Back to civilization. Back to your own people." "My own people are dead," Clara said flatly. "Raiders killed them. The same raiders your settlements did nothing to stop, despite my father's requests for military support. The same raiders you were happy to ignore until it became politically convenient to care." Brennan had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Miss Whitlock, I understand you've suffered trauma. That can affect a person's judgment, make them confused about where they belong. I'm not confused. Clara heard her voice getting stronger, steadier. I know exactly where I am and what's happened here. You want to verify the trade agreement? Fine. It's been honored. I'm alive, I'm healthy, and I've been integrated into this community exactly as promised. You've done your job. You can leave now. You think you belong here? The soldier's voice dripped with disbelief and something uglier. With them? You think they'll ever really accept you? You're white, miss. That doesn't change just because you put on their clothes and braid your hair like a squaw. The slur landed like a slap. Clara saw Ironhawk tense beside her, saw Falling Rain's expression harden, saw Redstone's hand tighten on his weapon. I think belonging is something you build, Clara said, fighting to keep her voice level. Not something you're born into. And I've done more building here in 2 months than I ever did in 18 years at the settlement. You're making a mistake, Brennan said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely concerned rather than just skeptical. The treaty situation is fragile right now. The territorial governor is pushing for expansion. If you stay here, if you choose them over your own kind, it sends a message that could have consequences you don't understand. What kind of consequences? Ironhawk asked quietly. Brennan looked at him directly. The kind where people in power decide that peaceful coexistence isn't working, that stronger measures are needed, that these lands would be better served in different hands. He paused. Miss Whitlock staying here, by choice, makes it harder for those of us arguing for restraint to make our case. So I'm supposed to sacrifice what I've found here, the purpose, the community, the chance to be something more than just another settler's daughter, because it makes your politics easier? Clara shook her head. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Brennan, but no. The soldier spat into the dirt. You're a traitor to your race. I'm a person trying to survive, Clara shot back. Same as everyone else here, same as everyone in your settlements. The only difference is, I'm not pretending that skin color matters more than human decency. Careful, girl, the soldier warned. You keep talking like that, people might decide you're not worth saving after all. Then don't save me, Clara said. I didn't ask for rescue. I didn't ask for you to come here and turn this into some grand political statement. I just asked to be left alone to live my life. As his wife? The soldier jerked his chin toward Ironhawk. You really expect us to believe you chose that? Clara felt Ironhawk stiffen beside her. Before she could think better of it, before she could let fear override instinct, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. Yes, Clara said clearly, I chose that. It wasn't entirely true. She'd been given to Ironhawk as part of a trade, with about as much choice as a sack of grain, but what had grown between them since, the careful respect, the teaching and learning, the way he'd stood between her and people's anger without asking for anything in return, that part was real. And if these men needed a simple story to take back to their settlements, Clara would give them one. Brennan studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, You understand what you're doing? The bridges you're burning? I understand I'm choosing a different bridge to build, Clara said. One that maybe leads somewhere better than where we've been. One of the other settlers, a grizzled trapper who hadn't spoken yet, leaned close to Brennan and muttered something Clara couldn't hear. Brennan nodded slowly, his jaw tight. We'll need to speak with the council directly, Brennan said, without the girl present. Verify the terms of the agreement. Make sure everyone understands the implications of what's being claimed here. Grey Cloud spoke and Ironhawk translated. The council agrees, but Ironhawk stays as representative of his household. This is acceptable? Brennan nodded curtly. Acceptable. Ironhawk squeezed Clara's hand once, then released it. Wait in the lodge, he said quietly. This won't take long. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stay and hear every word that was said about her and her choices, but she could see the wisdom in stepping back, in letting the men handle the political dancing without her presence complicating things further. She walked back to the lodge with Falling Rain, acutely aware of the eyes following them. That was brave, Falling Rain said once they were inside. Foolish, maybe, but brave. Was it foolish? Clara asked, choosing to stay. Falling Rain was quiet for a moment, her hands busy preparing tea neither of them really wanted. You stood up to armed men and told them you belonged here. You claim my brother as your husband in front of witnesses from both our peoples. You've either made yourself the strongest bridge between our worlds or the most obvious target." She poured the tea, handed Clara a cup. "Maybe both." "Redstone is going to hate this," Clara said. "Redstone hates everything right now. His anger needs somewhere to go." Falling Rain sipped her tea, her expression distant. "But the rest of us, we saw what you did, how you stood there and defended this place, these people, when you could have walked away free and clear." She met Clara's eyes. "That counts for something." Outside, voices rose and fell in heated discussion. Clara couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear enough. Argument, negotiation, the careful dance of people trying to avoid war while not giving up too much ground. "Do you think they'll accept it?" Clara asked. "That I'm staying?" "They don't have much choice," Falling Rain said. "The trade agreement was clear. One woman, to be integrated into our community. You've been integrated. If they try to take you back now, they're breaking the terms, not us, and they know it." But Mr. Brennan said it could affect the larger political situation, that the governor might— "The governor will do whatever he was going to do anyway," Falling Rain interrupted. "Men like that don't need real reasons. They just need excuses. You staying, you leaving, either way, he'll find his justification." She set down her cup. "At least this way, you get to live on your own terms." The meeting stretched on for hours. Clara paced the lodge, then forced herself to sit, then gave up and started organizing the medicine supplies just to have something to do with her hands. Falling Rain stayed with her, working quietly on beadwork, her presence steady and unexpectedly comforting. When the entrance flap finally opened, Clara jumped to her feet. Ironhawk looked exhausted. There was a new tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that suggested the discussion hadn't been easy. "Well?" Clara asked. "They're leaving." Ironhawk moved to the water skin, drank deeply. "Brennan will report back that the trade agreement has been honored, that you're here of your own stated will, and that any further interference would constitute a violation of the treaty." Relief flooded through Clara. "So it's over? For now." Ironhawk's expression was grim. But he wasn't lying about the political situation. The territorial governor has been looking for reasons to push expansion. This won't help those of us advocating for peace. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "If I'd known—" "You made the choice that was right for you," Ironhawk cut in. "That's what I told you to do. Don't apologize for it now." Falling Rain stood, gathering her things. "I should go. The council will want my report on the settlers' demeanor." She paused at the entrance, looking at Clara. "You did well today. My brother chose better than he knew." After she left, silence settled over the lodge. Clara watched Ironhawk move through his evening routine, checking weapons, banking the fire, the small rituals that marked the end of each day. He seemed distant, lost in thoughts he wasn't sharing. "Are you angry with me?" Clara asked finally. Ironhawk looked up, surprised. "Why would I be angry?" "Because I complicated things. Made them harder for you, for the council, for everyone here." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "Because I took your hand in front of everyone and claimed something that isn't real." Something flickered across Ironhawk's face. "Isn't it?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Clara wasn't sure how to unpack. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, "what we are. You've been kind to me, protective, but that doesn't mean—" She broke off, frustrated by her inability to find the right words. "I don't want to assume something that isn't there." Ironhawk crossed the lodge slowly, stopping just close enough that Clara had to look up to meet his eyes. "When I agreed to the trade, I thought I was accepting a political arrangement, a means to an end." His voice was quiet, careful. "I didn't expect you to be you." "What does that mean?" "It means you're strong when you should be broken, kind when you have every reason to be bitter, brave when the easy choice would be to hide." He paused. "It means I look forward to coming back here at the end of the day, to seeing what you've learned, how you've helped, what impossible thing you've accomplished. It means when you took my hand today, it didn't feel like a lie." Clara's breath caught. "Ironhawk, I know this isn't what either of us expected," he continued. "I know the circumstances were wrong, that you were given no real choice at the beginning. But what's grown since—" He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. That feels like a choice we're both making. Clara's heart was racing. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of this. Of what it means. Of what happens if I let myself feel… She couldn't finish the sentence. I know, Ironhawk said softly. I'm afraid too. I lost everything once. The thought of caring that much again, of having something to lose. He shook his head. It terrifies me. Then why risk it? Because the alternative is staying empty. Ironhawk's hand lingered near her face, not quite touching, but close enough that Clara could feel the warmth. And I'm tired of being empty. Clara closed the distance between them, making the choice before she could talk herself out of it. The kiss was tentative, uncertain, nothing like the grand romantic gestures from the stories her mother used to read. It was awkward and a little desperate, and probably too fast given everything they'd been through. It was also the most honest thing Clara had done since the night her world burned down. When they pulled apart, Ironhawk rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. We don't have to… I mean, if you're not ready… I'm not, Clara admitted. Ready, I mean, not for everything. But for this? For trying? She pulled back enough to see his face. I think I'm ready for that. Then we'll try, Ironhawk said. Slowly, at your pace. That night they slept on opposite sides of the lodge like always. But it felt different somehow. Less like maintaining careful distance and more like a choice they were making together. To take their time, to build something real rather than rushing toward expectations neither of them was ready for. Clara lay in the darkness, swift rabbit stone clutched in her hand, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was helping Falling Rain prepare breakfast when Swift Rabbit came running, his face flushed with excitement. "Soldiers," he announced in his mixed language, "coming back, but different ones." Clara's stomach dropped. She exchanged a glance with Falling Rain, and they both hurried toward the edge of camp, where a small group had gathered to watch the approaching riders. Not 8 men this time, 20 at least, with proper military uniforms and rifles carried ready across their saddles. At their head rode a man Clara didn't recognize, older, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Ironhawk appeared at Clara's side, his expression grim. "That's Colonel Morrison. He commands the territorial garrison." "What does he want?" "Nothing good." The riders stopped at the edge of camp, and Morrison dismounted with the stiff movements of someone who'd been in the saddle too long. His eyes swept the gathered crowd and landed on Clara with unsettling focus. "Miss Clara Whitlock?" His voice carried the clipped precision of military training. "Yes," Clara said, stepping forward before anyone could stop her. "Colonel Robert Morrison, Territorial Command. I'm here to discuss a matter of some urgency regarding your presence in this encampment." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "I have here a sworn statement from your uncle, Harold Whitlock, claiming that you were taken against your will and are being held under duress." Clara's blood ran cold. "My uncle? Your father's brother, currently residing in Denver. He was notified of your family's death and your situation here. He's petitioned the territorial governor for military intervention to secure your return." Morrison's expression was professionally neutral. "He's family, Miss Whitlock, your only living relative. The law is on his side." "I've never even met my uncle," Clara said, her voice shaking. "My father hadn't spoken to him in 15 years. They had some kind of falling out before I was born." "That may be," Morrison said, "but he's still your legal guardian now that your parents are deceased, and he's demanding your return to proper society." Ironhawk moved closer to Clara. "She's stated clearly that she wishes to remain here. We have witnesses from yesterday's meeting. Thomas Brennan can verify." "Mr. Brennan's report is what prompted this visit," Morrison interrupted. "He expressed concern that Miss Whitlock may be suffering from what we call captivity syndrome, a psychological condition where prisoners begin to sympathize with their captors, sometimes to the point of refusing rescue." He looked at Clara with something that might have been pity. "It's not your fault, miss, but it does make you unreliable as a witness to your own situation." "That's insane," Clara said. "I'm not suffering from anything except an unwanted intervention in my life. I chose to stay here. I choose to stay here now. That should be the end of it." "Legally, it's not." Morrison unfolded the document. "Your uncle has legal standing to make decisions on your behalf until you reach the age of 21 or marry. And since any marriage performed here wouldn't be recognized by territorial law, he let the implication hang. Clara felt the ground shifting under her feet. So what? You're just going to drag me out of here? Start a war because a stranger I've never met decided he wants to control my life? I'm going to enforce the law, Morrison said, which states that young women without proper guardianship need to be returned to civilized care. You can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. But either way, Miss Whitlock, you're leaving with us today. The camp erupted. Warriors reached for weapons. Women pulled children back. Elders shouted in angry voices. Morrison's soldiers raised their rifles in response, creating a standoff that could turn bloody in seconds. Wait! Clara's voice cut through the chaos. Just everyone wait! The noise died down, but the tension remained, thick enough to choke on. Clara's mind raced. She could refuse, could let this turn into the fight everyone seemed primed for, but people would die. Swift Rabbit might die. Ironhawk might die. And for what? Because some uncle she'd never met had decided to assert legal rights he'd never bothered to exercise when it might have actually mattered. But if she went with them, everything she'd built here would crumble. The trust, the belonging, the fragile hope that maybe she could be part of something better than the cycle of violence and suspicion that had defined the frontier for as long as she could remember. There had to be another way. There had to be. An idea struck her, crazy and desperate and possibly brilliant. Colonel Morrison, Clara said carefully, you said my uncle's claim is based on me being unmarried and under 21? Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. That's correct. And that any marriage performed here wouldn't be recognized by territorial law? Also correct. Clara turned to Ironhawk, her heart pounding. How binding are marriage ceremonies in your tradition? Once performed, are they considered final? Ironhawk studied her face, and Clara saw the moment he understood what she was proposing. Completely binding. Once the ceremony is complete and witnessed, it cannot be undone except by death. But we're already... Clara started, then caught herself. They'd been calling each other husband and wife, but no actual ceremony had taken place. It had been a legal arrangement, nothing more. We need to make it real, now, in front of everyone. You can't be serious, Morrison said. A savage ritual doesn't... It does if you want to avoid bloodshed, Clara interrupted. You said the problem is I'm unmarried. Fine. Marry me off according to the laws and customs of the people I've chosen to live with. Then my uncle has no legal standing because I'm a married woman making my own decisions. It won't hold up in territorial court, Morrison warned. Maybe not, Clara agreed, but it'll create enough legal confusion that you can't just drag me out of here today without risking major political complications. The treaties specify that internal tribal matters are handled by tribal law. If I'm married by their custom to one of their people, that makes me an internal matter. She could see Morrison working through the logic, could see him realizing that she was right. It was a loophole, messy and complicated, but it was there. This is highly irregular, Morrison said. This whole situation is irregular, Clara shot back. I'm offering you a solution that doesn't involve anyone getting killed today. Take it. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Ironhawk. If we allow this ceremony to proceed, can you guarantee the girl's safety? Her well-being? She's not a girl, Ironhawk said flatly. She's a woman making her own choice. And yes, I guarantee her safety with my life. Then I suppose we have a wedding to witness, Morrison said, though he didn't sound happy about it. The next hour passed in a blur. Falling rain appeared with ceremonial clothing, helped Clara change while explaining in rapid, barely comprehensible words what would happen during the ceremony. The entire camp gathered, settlers and soldiers creating an uneasy perimeter around the sacred space. Grey Cloud performed the ritual, his voice steady and sure despite the unusual circumstances. Clara understood maybe half of what he said, but the meaning came through. This was a binding, a joining, a promise made before witnesses that couldn't be taken back. When he gestured for them to join hands, Clara's were shaking. Ironhawk took them anyway, his grip warm and steady. Are you sure? He asked quietly, in English, just for her. No, Clara admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my girl, Ironhawk said, and there was something in his voice, pride maybe, or affection, or the kind of respect that came from recognizing strength in another person. The ceremony concluded with them drinking from the same cup, their hands still joined, while the camp sang traditional songs that made Clara's throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. And just like that, she was married. Really, truly, permanently married. To a man she'd met 2 months ago under the worst possible circumstances. A man whose language she barely spoke, whose culture she was still learning, whose past was carved into him like scars. A man who'd given her space to heal, purpose to pursue, and the freedom to choose her own path. Morrison approached afterward, his expression stony. "This doesn't end here. Your uncle will challenge this. The courts will be involved." "Let them be involved," Clara said. She was still holding Ironhawk's hand and didn't plan to let go. "I'll say the same thing I said today. This is my choice. This is my life. And I'm living it on my terms." Morrison shook his head slowly. "You're making enemies in places that matter, Miss Whitlock." "Mrs.," Clara corrected. "And I'd rather have enemies I chose than friends who treat me like property." After the soldiers left, after the camp slowly returned to normal, after the reality of what she'd done started to sink in, Clara sat beside Ironhawk in their lodge and tried to process it all. "We're actually married," she said, more to herself than to him. "We are," Ironhawk confirmed. That's completely insane." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara started laughing, helpless giggles that turned into full-body shaking until tears ran down her face. Ironhawk watched her with an expression somewhere between concern and amusement. "I'm sorry," Clara gasped. "It's just 2 months ago I was planning my winter preserves and arguing with my brother about chores. Now I'm married to a warrior in a tribal camp and using legal loopholes to avoid being kidnapped by my own family. It's absurd. It's your life," Ironhawk said quietly, "and you're taking control of it. There's nothing absurd about that." Clara's laughter faded. She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who was now her husband in every sense that mattered. "I don't regret it," she said. "The ceremony, the choice, any of it." "Good," Ironhawk said. "Neither do I. But we should probably talk about what this actually means. For us. For how we live." "We should," Ironhawk agreed. "But not tonight. Tonight, let's just—" He gestured helplessly, searching for words. "Let's just sit here and be grateful we're both still alive and no one got shot." Clara thought about that. About Swift Rabbit, still safe and whole. About Falling Rain, who'd helped her prepare for a wedding she never expected to have. About the children who'd started to trust her, the women who'd begun to accept her, the fragile community she'd somehow become part of. "Yeah," she said softly, "I can do that." They sat together in the firelight, not touching but close, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of broken worlds and decided to build something new. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to simple. But it was theirs, and that counted for something. Outside, the camp settled in for the night. Somewhere in the darkness, Swift Rabbit was probably arranging his rock collection for the 100th time. Falling Rain was preparing lessons for tomorrow's teaching circle. Redstone was sharpening his anger into something sharp enough to cut. And Clara, for the first time since the fire that took her family, felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The feeling lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning after the ceremony, Clara woke to the sound of horses. Too many horses, and voices raised in alarm. She stumbled out of the lodge to find the camp in chaos, warriors grabbing weapons, women herding children toward the trees, elders shouting orders that nobody seemed to be following. Ironhawk was already dressed, his rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he said without looking at her. "What's happening?" "Riders from the western settlements, armed party, maybe 30 strong." His jaw was tight. "They're not here to talk." Clara's stomach dropped. "Morrison?" "No, settlers. Vigilantes, probably." Ironhawk finally looked at her, and his expression made her blood run cold. "They're coming for you, Clara. Your uncle must have put a price on your return." Before Clara could respond, the sound of gunfire cracked through the morning air. Not close, but not far enough either. The camp erupted into motion, warriors forming defensive positions while the vulnerable scattered into the surrounding forest. Falling Rain appeared, grabbing Clara's arm. "Come, now. I can't just—" "You can and you will." Falling Rain's grip was iron. "You're what they want. If you're here, people die defending you. If you're hidden, maybe we can negotiate." It went against every instinct Clara had, but the logic was sound. She let falling rain pull her toward the trees, along with a group of women and children moving fast and quiet through the underbrush. Swift Rabbit was there, his eyes wide with fear, clutching his mother's stone like it could protect him. They'd barely reached the tree line when the riders came into view. 30 men, like Ironhawk had said, all armed, all looking like they'd come prepared for a fight. At their head was a man Clara didn't recognize, tall, with a thick beard and eyes that promised violence. "We know you got her," he shouted toward the camp. "The white woman. Hand her over peaceful, and nobody needs to get hurt." Grey Cloud stepped forward, his bearing dignified despite the rifles pointed at his chest. He spoke in his own language, his tone measured and firm. "You don't understand your savage talk, old man," the bearded leader said. "We want the Whitlock girl, now, or we start burning lodges until someone gets cooperative." "She's not here," Ironhawk called out in English, appearing from behind one of the larger lodges. "You're wasting your time." "That's so." The bearded man gestured to his men. "Then you won't mind if we take a look around." "I mind," Ironhawk said flatly. "This is sovereign territory. You have no authority here. We got the authority of 30 rifles and the backing of every settlement within 100 miles, the man shot back. "See? Folks are tired of you people taking our women, breaking our treaties, acting like you got rights to land that's meant for civilized folk. Time someone taught you different." Clara watched from the trees, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This wasn't about her uncle. This wasn't about legal guardianship or territorial law. This was something uglier, something that had been building long before she ever arrived at this camp. She was just the excuse they'd been waiting for. "You got 30 seconds to produce the girl," the bearded man said, pulling a torch from his saddle. "Then we start with that lodge there." He pointed to the one Clara had been living in. "Work our way through until someone remembers where you're hiding her." From her hiding spot, Clara saw Redstone move into position with several other young warriors, their weapons ready. Saw the settlers shift in response, fingers tightening on triggers. Saw the moment poised on a knife's edge, ready to tip into bloodshed. She couldn't let this happen. Couldn't let people die because she'd made a choice these men didn't agree with. Before anyone could stop her, before she could talk herself out of it, Clara stepped out of the trees. "I'm here," she called out. "I'm Clara Whitlock. You want me? Fine, but leave these people alone." "Clara, no!" Falling Rain hissed, reaching for her, but Clara was already walking toward the camp, her hands raised, her heart in her throat. Every eye turned to her. The settlers, the warriors, Ironhawk, whose expression went from determination to horror in the space of a heartbeat. The bearded man smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. "Well now, that was easier than expected. Come on over here, miss. Let's get you back where you belong." Clara kept walking, kept her chin up even though every instinct screamed at her to run. When she was close enough to see the details of the man's face, the cold calculation in his eyes, the way his hand rested on his pistol, she stopped. "I'll go with you," she said clearly, "on one condition." The man laughed. "You ain't in a position to bargain, girl." "I think I am," Clara said, "because you don't actually want me. You want to prove a point. Want to show these people that they can't keep what they take, that they don't have any real power here." She gestured to the armed men behind him. "But if you take me by force, if you hurt anyone in this camp, you're not proving anything except that settlers can't be trusted, that treaties mean nothing, that peace is impossible." "Peace is impossible," the man said. "We figured that out a long time ago." "Maybe," Clara agreed, "but there are people on both sides who haven't figured it out yet. People who still think there might be another way. You start killing today, you prove them all wrong. You make the next generation's war inevitable." The bearded man studied her with narrow eyes. "You think you can just talk your way out of this?" "No," Clara said honestly. "I think I'm going to leave with you, and you're going to let these people be, and everyone's going to walk away angry but alive. And then maybe, years from now, someone will remember that one time it almost turned into a massacre, but didn't." "That's a nice speech," the man said. "Real pretty, but you're still coming with us, and we're still burning a few lodges on the way out. Call it a message about consequences." "No!" Ironhawk's voice cut through the tension. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Clara and the settlers. "She offered you a peaceful solution. You don't get to take that and still cause destruction." "You gonna stop me?" The bearded man's hand dropped to his pistol. You and what army? This one, a new voice called out. Everyone turned to see Colonel Morrison riding into the clearing, this time with what looked like a full military company, easily 50 soldiers, all armed, all looking significantly more disciplined than the vigilante group. The bearded man's confidence faltered. Colonel, this don't concern the army. This is a civilian matter. 30 armed men invading treaty territory concerns the army very much, Morrison said crisply. He dismounted, his expression thunderous. What the hell do you think you're doing, Hoskins? Retrieving stolen property, Hoskins said, but his bravado was cracking. That girl was taken by these savages, and her family wants her back. That girl, Morrison said, his voice like ice, is a married woman who made her choice in front of multiple witnesses, including myself. Whatever your personal feelings about that choice, it doesn't give you the right to invade sovereign territory with an armed mob. Her uncle is a drunk in Denver who hasn't seen his niece since she was in diapers, Morrison interrupted. I did some checking after our last visit. Harold Whitlock is trying to claim his brother's land rights, and he needs his niece under his control to do it. This has nothing to do with family concern and everything to do with greed. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. She'd suspected, but having it confirmed, that her supposed rescue was just another form of theft made her want to scream. The law says, Hoskins started. The law says you're trespassing on treaty land with hostile intent, Morrison cut him off, which gives me the authority to arrest every last one of you for inciting warfare. You want to test whether a territorial judge will side with you or with the United States Army? The standoff stretched out, tense and ugly, with 30 vigilantes facing 50 soldiers and an entire camp of warriors who'd been ready to fight to the death minutes ago. Finally, Hoskins spat into the dirt. This ain't over. Yes, it is, Morrison said firmly. You're going to turn around, ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and spread the word that Clara Whitlock is legally married and under the protection of both her husband's people and the territorial military. Anyone else who wants to try this will face formal charges. Am I clear? Hoskins glared at Clara like this was somehow her fault, like she'd personally offended him by choosing to live. Then he yanked his horse around and gestured for his men to follow. They left slowly, making it clear they weren't retreating out of fear, but tactical withdrawal. Nobody believed it, but nobody called them on it either. When the last rider disappeared over the ridge, the entire camp seemed to exhale at once. Women emerged from the trees with their children, warriors lowered their weapons, elders gathered to discuss what had just happened and what it meant for the future. Clara stood in the middle of it all, shaking so hard she thought her legs might give out. Morrison approached her, his expression less harsh than before. You've caused quite a situation, Mrs. I'm sorry. What's your married name? Clara blinked. She hadn't even thought about that. I don't know. We didn't discuss. She looked at Ironhawk helplessly. In our tradition, she keeps her own name, Ironhawk said. But she's under my family's protection. That's what matters. Morrison nodded slowly. For what it's worth, you showed courage out there, stepping forward like that, trying to negotiate when you could have stayed hidden. He paused. But courage only gets you so far. Hoskins wasn't wrong about one thing. This situation is going to keep causing problems. There are people in the settlements who see your choice as a betrayal, as a symbol of everything they fear about losing control of the frontier. I didn't choose to be a symbol, Clara said tiredly. I just chose to live. Sometimes there's no difference, Morrison said. He turned to Grey Cloud, switching to careful, formal language. I apologize for the intrusion. The Army will increase patrols in this area, make sure no more unauthorized groups cross onto treaty land. Grey Cloud responded and Ironhawk translated. He says the Council appreciates the Army's intervention today, but he wants assurances that military presence won't become its own form of intrusion. Fair enough, Morrison said. We'll maintain perimeter patrols only. No camps on tribal land without explicit permission. He looked at Clara one more time. You made your bed, Mrs. Whitlock. I hope you understand what that means in the long term. I'm learning, Clara said. After Morrison and his soldiers left, the camp slowly returned to some semblance of normal, but the tension remained, thick and oppressive, like storm clouds that refused to break. Clara sat in the lodge with Ironhawk, neither of them speaking for a long time. Finally, she said, I'm sorry. For what? For bringing this down on everyone. For being the reason armed men showed up ready to burn the camp, for— Stop, Ironhawk interrupted. You didn't bring this. It was already here waiting for an excuse. If it wasn't you, it would have been something else. He looked at her directly. You're not responsible for other people's hatred. But people could have died today. Because of me. Because I refused to go back to a life I didn't want. People could have died because a group of violent men decided treaty land didn't matter and sovereign rights were negotiable, Ironhawk corrected. That's not your fault. Clara wanted to believe him, but she kept seeing Swift Rabbit's terrified face, kept hearing the casual way Hoskins had talked about burning lodges, kept thinking about how close they'd come to turning the clearing into a battlefield. What do we do now? She asked. Ironhawk was quiet for a moment. We prepare. This was a warning shot. Next time they'll be smarter about it, better organized. And Morrison can't be everywhere at once. So we just wait for the next attack? No, Ironhawk said slowly. We change the situation. Make ourselves harder to attack, less isolated, more connected to forces that even people like Hoskins can't ignore. How do we do that? Before Ironhawk could answer, Falling Rain ducked into the lodge, her expression urgent. The council is gathering. They want to speak with both of you. The council meeting was tense from the start. The elders sat in their traditional circle, but the usual order was disrupted by heated discussion. Redstone stood among the younger warriors, his expression triumphant in a way that made Clara's stomach sink. This is what I warned about, Redstone said, his English sharp with anger. This is what happens when we let them in. When we compromise, negotiate, try to find peace with people who only understand violence. Today proved we can find allies among the soldiers, Grey Cloud countered. Morrison intervened. He stopped the attack. Morrison protected his own interests, Redstone shot back. He doesn't care about us. He cares about maintaining his authority, his control. The moment we stop being useful to him, he'll turn those rifles on us just like Hoskins wanted to. Several of the younger warriors murmured agreement. Clara could see the council splitting, lines being drawn between those who still believed in negotiation and those who'd given up on it. What do you propose? Grey Cloud asked, his voice heavy. War? Against settlements that outnumber us 10-1? Against an army with resources we can't match? I propose we stop pretending we can live alongside them, Redstone said. I propose we take our people, move farther west, away from the settlements and the treaties and the lies. Find land they haven't stolen yet and defend it with our lives. There's no land they haven't claimed, one of the other elders said sadly. The surveyors are everywhere. The treaties get smaller every year. Running just delays the inevitable. Then maybe the inevitable is what we should prepare for, Redstone said. He looked directly at Clara. Starting with removing the symbol that draws their attention. Send her back. Let her uncle have her. Remove the excuse for their anger. She's married, Ironhawk said flatly. By our law, by our custom. You can't just undo that. I can if the council votes to dissolve the marriage, Redstone countered. We have that authority in extreme circumstances. And I'd say armed men threatening to burn our home qualifies as extreme. The council erupted into argument. Clara stood there, feeling like she was drowning, like the ground kept shifting under her feet no matter how hard she tried to find solid footing. Finally, Grey Cloud raised his hand for silence. This requires careful thought. Immediate decisions made in fear and anger serve no one. We will reconvene tomorrow at dawn with cooler heads and clearer minds. And until then, Redstone demanded. Until then, nothing changes, Grey Cloud said firmly. The marriage stands. Clara remains under Ironhawk's protection. And anyone who has a problem with that can bring it to the full council tomorrow. The meeting dispersed, but the tension didn't. Clara could feel eyes on her as she walked back to the lodge, could hear whispered conversations that stopped when she got too close. That night, she couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about Redstone's words, about the council meeting tomorrow, about the very real possibility that she'd be sent away from the only place that had felt like home in months. Talk to me, Ironhawk said from across the fire. He'd been awake too, she realized, probably had been the whole time. What if they vote to dissolve the marriage? Clara asked. What if they decide I'm not worth the trouble? Then we'll deal with it, Ironhawk said. How? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, There are other camps, other tribes who might be more welcoming, less afraid. We could leave, start somewhere new. You'd leave your people? Your home? I left before, Ironhawk said quietly. After my wife and daughter died, I wandered for almost a year, couldn't stand to be in the places that reminded me of them. Eventually I came back because I thought I had a duty here, a purpose. He looked at her across the fire. But if that purpose is served better somewhere else, with someone who's become important to me, then yes, I'd leave again. Clara's throat tightened. I've become important to you? You know you have. Say it anyway, Clara whispered. I need to hear it. Ironhawk crossed the lodge slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something wild that might bolt. He knelt beside Clara, took her face in his hands with a gentleness that made her want to cry. You are important to me, he said clearly. More important than I expected, more than I was ready for. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to care about tomorrow, a reason to build instead of just survive. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. If the council votes against us tomorrow, we'll leave, together, and we'll find somewhere that we can be what we're becoming. What are we becoming? Clara asked. I don't know yet, Ironhawk admitted, but I want to find out. Clara kissed him then, properly this time, without the hesitation of that first tentative attempt. He responded with a hunger that matched her own, hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. They didn't cross the final threshold that night. Both of them still carried too much damage, too much history that needed more time to heal. But they held each other in the firelight, shared whispered confessions and half-formed dreams, built the foundation of something that felt strong enough to weather what was coming. Morning came too fast. The council gathered as the sun rose, the entire camp present to witness whatever decision would be made. Clara stood beside Ironhawk, falling rain on her other side, and waited for her fate to be decided by people who had every right to put their own survival first. Grey Cloud spoke first, his words measured and careful. Ironhawk translated in low tones. He says the council has considered the situation from all angles, the danger Clara's presence brings, the value she's added to the community, the symbolic weight of the marriage, the practical realities of our position. Ironhawk's voice was steady, but Clara could feel the tension in his body. They've reached a decision. The clearing went silent. The marriage will stand, Grey Cloud said in English, clearly enough that everyone could understand. Clara will remain under Ironhawk's protection and part of this community. Relief flooded through Clara so suddenly she thought her knees might buckle. However, Grey Cloud continued, and the relief turned to ice. We recognize that her presence does draw unwanted attention, that settlers use her as an excuse for their aggression, that our position here becomes more precarious with each confrontation. What are you saying? Ironhawk asked. I'm saying we need to change our position, Grey Cloud said. Make ourselves less vulnerable, less isolated. The Council has voted to accept an offer we received last month from the Northern Confederation to join their alliance, combine our strengths, create a unified territory that even the settlers will have to respect. The Northern Confederation is 3 weeks' travel from here, one of the other elders said. We'd have to leave this land, these hunting grounds, the graves of our ancestors. We'd have to leave or die, Grey Cloud said bluntly. Those are our options. The Confederation offers protection in numbers, shared resources, unified negotiating power. It's not perfect, but it's better than waiting here for the next Hoskins to arrive with more men and more anger. Redstone stepped forward. And if I refuse? If others refuse? We have a right to stay and defend our land. You do, Grey Cloud agreed. And the Council will not force anyone to move. But those who stay do so knowing they're choosing a fight they probably can't win, and those who leave do so knowing they might never return. The weight of the decision settled over the camp like snow, cold and heavy and inescapable. How long do we have to decide? Falling Rain asked. 2 weeks, Grey Cloud said. We need time to prepare for the journey, to pack what can be carried, to say goodbye to what can't. His eyes found Clara. And we need time to make sure everyone understands what we're choosing and why. Over the next 2 weeks, the camp transformed. Some families began packing immediately, eager for the protection the Confederation promised. Others held back, torn between fear of the unknown and fear of staying put. A handful, including Redstone and several of the younger warriors, made it clear they'd rather die defending their land than abandon it. Clara threw herself into helping however she could. She treated injuries, packed medicine supplies, helped the children understand what was happening in terms that didn't terrify them completely. Swift Rabbit clung to her whenever he got the chance, his earlier excitement about everything replaced by a quiet fear he couldn't quite articulate. "Will the new place have rocks?" he asked her one afternoon, his voice small. "I bet it has amazing rocks," Clara said, though she had no idea. "Different kinds than here, new ones to collect." "What if I don't like them?" "Then you'll keep the ones you have now and remember where they came from," Clara said gently. "Sometimes the best treasures are the ones that remind us of home." Swift Rabbit considered this, then carefully placed one of his favorite stones in Clara's hand. "For you, so you remember." Clara's vision blurred. "Thank you, little one. I'll keep it safe." That night, Ironhawk found Clara sitting outside the lodge, staring up at the stars. He settled beside her without speaking, just sharing the quiet. "Do you think we're making the right choice?" Clara asked finally. "Leaving?" "I think we're making the only choice that doesn't end with everyone dead," Ironhawk said. "Whether that's the same as right, I don't know." "I feel like I'm always running," Clara admitted. "From the raiders who killed my family, from the settlers who wanted to control me. Now from this place that was starting to feel like home." "You're not running," Ironhawk said firmly. "You're choosing survival. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "Running is moving away from something. What we're doing is moving toward something, toward a chance at peace, at stability, at a future where we don't have to sleep with weapons beside the bed every night." Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his solidity. "What if the Confederation doesn't accept me? What if they see me the same way Hoskins did, as a symbol of everything wrong with trying to coexist?" "Then we'll deal with it," Ironhawk said. "Together. We'll keep moving until we find somewhere that accepts us for what we are instead of what we represent." "And what are we?" Ironhawk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We're two people who've lost everything and decided to build something new anyway. We're proof that the old boundaries don't have to define the future. We're—" He paused, searching for words. "We're hope, I think. Complicated, messy, imperfect hope. But hope nonetheless." Clara turned that over in her mind, testing it for truth. Maybe Ironhawk was right. Maybe choosing to keep trying, keep building, keep believing that peace was possible. Maybe that was its own form of courage. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and painful goodbyes. On the last night before they left, the camp held a ceremony to honor the land they were leaving, the ancestors buried there, the memories that would stay behind. Clara watched families say goodbye to graves they'd never visit again, saw warriors touch their hands to trees their grandfathers had planted, heard songs that held centuries of history in every note. And she understood finally and fully what her choice had cost. Not just her, but everyone who decided that keeping her was worth the price of displacement. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Falling Rain as they worked side by side, packing the last of the medicine supplies. "I'm so sorry this is happening because of me." "It's not because of you," Falling Rain said, though her voice was tight with grief. "It's because of men like Hoskins, who can't imagine a world where we all exist together. It's because of broken treaties and stolen land and centuries of violence that won't stop just because we want it to." She paused, her hand stilling. "You're just the most recent excuse. If it wasn't you, it would be something else." "That doesn't make it easier." "No," Falling Rain agreed. "It doesn't." Dawn broke on moving day with a sky so clear it felt like mockery. Clara helped load the last of the supplies onto travois and pack horses, her body moving through familiar motions while her mind struggled to accept that this was real, this was happening, they were actually leaving. Swift Rabbit appeared at her side, his small hand slipping into hers. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Me too," Clara said honestly. "But we'll be scared together, okay? And maybe on the other side of scared, we'll find something good." The boy nodded, then darted away to help his father, who'd finally stopped glaring at Clara long enough to focus on the practical work of survival. Redstone and his followers stayed behind, standing at the edge of camp like sentinels, watching everyone else prepare to leave. When Clara passed by, Redstone called out, "This is your fault," he said. Not angry anymore, just stating what he believed to be fact. "All of this." Clara stopped, met his eyes. "I know you think that, and maybe you're right. But I can't undo what's been done. All I can do is try to make the future different." "The future is already written," Redstone said. Your people will take everything. My people will resist until there's nothing left to resist with. And people like you, people who think they can bridge the gap, you'll just end up crushed between both sides." "Maybe," Clara said. "Or maybe enough people choosing to build bridges will eventually create a path across. I'd rather die trying than give up because it seems impossible." Redstone studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "I hope you're right. I don't think you are, but I hope it anyway." It was the closest thing to peace they'd ever have. The journey to the Northern Confederation began just after sunrise. Clara walked beside Ironhawk near the front of the line, part of a stream of people stretching back as far as she could see. They left behind lodges that would collapse with the first strong wind, fire pits that would fill with rain and debris, the physical markers of a community that had existed here for generations. But they carried with them something more important, the determination to survive, to adapt, to keep moving forward even when the path wasn't clear. As they crested the first ridge, Clara looked back one last time at the camp, saw Redstone and his small group already beginning the work of fortifying what remained, saw the land that had been her home, briefly, stretching out green and beautiful and indifferent to human struggles. Then she turned forward toward whatever came next and didn't look back again. The journey took 18 days instead of the promised 3 weeks, pushed faster by fear of pursuit and the approach of autumn storms. Clara's feet developed blisters that turned to calluses, her back ached from carrying supplies, and she learned more curse words in 3 different languages than she'd known existed. But she also learned other things: how to read the land for water sources, how to keep children entertained during long marches with nothing but stories and games made from sticks and stones, how to stretch food supplies when hunting proved scarce, how a community could function while in motion, settling into new rhythms that had nothing to do with permanent structures. Swift Rabbit walked beside her most days, his initial fear giving way to the resilient adaptability of childhood. He collected rocks from each campsite, creating a trail of memories in stone form that he'd carry forward into whatever came next. "When we get there," he asked one evening as they made camp, "will there be other children?" "I hope so," Clara said, helping him arrange his latest finds. "Lots of them, probably." "Will they like me?" The question hit Clara harder than it should have. This boy who'd lost his mother, whose father barely looked at him, who'd attached himself to a white woman his people had every reason to reject. He just wanted to know if he'd be accepted somewhere. "They'll love you," Clara said firmly. "How could they not?" Swift Rabbit considered this seriously. "Redstone didn't love you. He said you were poison." Clara winced. "Redstone is hurt. Sometimes hurt people say things that aren't fair because they need somewhere to put all that pain." "Are you hurt?" "Yes," Clara admitted, "but I'm trying not to let it make me mean." Swift Rabbit nodded like this made perfect sense, then returned to organizing his rocks by size. Clara watched him, thinking about resilience and innocence and how children always seemed to understand the important things better than adults did. That night, lying beside Ironhawk under stars that seemed impossibly bright, Clara said, "Do you think we're doing the right thing? Not just leaving, but all of it. The marriage, the choice to stay together, dragging all these people into our mess." "It's not our mess," Ironhawk said. "It's history's mess. We're just trying to survive it." "That doesn't answer my question." Ironhawk rolled onto his side to face her. "I think right and wrong are easier concepts when you're not living through something. When you can look back with distance and certainty. But in the moment, we make the best choices we can with what we know and hope they lead somewhere worth reaching." "Very philosophical," Clara said. "Very tired," Ironhawk corrected, "and worried, and trying not to show it because everyone's looking to me for confidence I don't actually have." The admission surprised Clara. Ironhawk always seemed so certain, so steady. Hearing him confess doubt made her love him more, which seemed backwards but felt true. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're doing great at the confidence thing." "Good," Ironhawk said, "because inside I'm screaming most of the time." Clara laughed, couldn't help it. Ironhawk smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine, and pulled her closer. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other like they could create safety through proximity alone. The Northern Confederation's territory announced itself with watchposts and armed patrols 3 days before they reached the main settlement. The warriors who met them were cautious but not hostile, Their leader a woman called Bright Arrow, who had eyes that missed nothing and a voice that commanded attention without raising volume. Gray Cloud, she greeted the elder with formal respect. You're earlier than expected. Circumstances changed, Gray Cloud replied. We bring 73 people seeking the alliance we discussed. Bright Arrow's gaze swept the group, lingering on Clara with unmistakable interest. And you bring complications, I see. We bring strength, skills, and commitment to the Confederation's goals, Gray Cloud said firmly. The complications come from outside forces, not from our people. Your people include a white woman married to one of your warriors, Bright Arrow observed. That's not a complication. The settlers will use it as an excuse to harass Confederation territory just like they harassed yours. The settlers will find excuses regardless, Falling Rain said, stepping forward. At least this way we choose which excuses we give them. Bright Arrow studied Falling Rain for a long moment, then turned back to Gray Cloud. The council will need to meet, discuss terms, address concerns, determine if integration is feasible. She gestured toward the settlement visible in the distance. You can camp at the eastern edge tonight. We'll send food and water. The council will convene at dawn. As they set up temporary shelters, Clara felt the weight of stares from Confederation members who'd come to observe the newcomers. She tried to make herself small, unnoticeable, but it was impossible. Her skin marked her, her braided hair couldn't hide what she was, and the way Ironhawk stayed close to her side only drew more attention. They hate me, Clara murmured as she helped unload supplies. They don't know you yet, Ironhawk corrected. Give them time. We might not have time, Clara said. If the council decides I'm too much of a risk, then we'll deal with it, Ironhawk said, the same answer he'd given before. Clara was starting to understand it wasn't dismissive. It was the only promise he could make in a world where nothing was certain. The council meeting the next morning was held in a large structure at the settlement center, with representatives from 5 different groups that made up the Confederation. Clara wasn't allowed to attend, neither were most of the other newcomers, so she spent the hours waiting with the children, teaching them a counting game her brother had invented, and trying not to think about how her entire future was being decided by people who had no reason to trust her. Swift Rabbit stayed plastered to her side, his earlier enthusiasm dampened by the unfamiliar surroundings and sea of strange faces. When Clara suggested he go play with the other children, he shook his head violently. What if they don't like me? He whispered. What if they do? Clara countered. You'll never know if you don't try. You try first, Swift Rabbit said. Show me how. So Clara approached a group of Confederation children playing some kind of game with carved wooden pieces. They stopped and stared when she got close, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. My name is Clara, she said in the clearest version of their language she could manage. This is Swift Rabbit. We're new. Can we learn your game? The children looked at each other uncertainly. Then one, a girl maybe 10 years old with fierce eyes, said, You're the white woman everyone's arguing about. I am, Clara admitted. My mother says you're going to bring soldiers down on us, the girl said, that you'll get people killed. Clara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet the girl's gaze. I don't want anyone to get killed. I'm trying to live peacefully. But your mother's not wrong to be worried. My presence does complicate things. Then why don't you leave? The girl asked bluntly. Because I don't have anywhere else to go, Clara said honestly. And because the people I came here with, they've become my family. I won't abandon them just because it would be easier. The girl studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up one of the carved pieces and held it out. This is a fox. Foxes move 3 spaces and can jump over bears. Sit down and I'll teach you the rest. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a start. By the time the council meeting ended, Clara had learned the game. Swift Rabbit had made 2 tentative friends, and the knot in her stomach had loosened slightly. When Ironhawk appeared at the edge of the playing area, his expression was carefully neutral. Well? Clara asked, standing quickly. Walk with me, Ironhawk said. They left the children's area and headed toward the edge of the settlement, where trees provided privacy from curious ears. Clara's heart hammered the entire way. The council debated for hours, Ironhawk said finally, about whether integrating our group was worth the risk, whether your presence specifically would endanger the Confederation, whether we should be turned away entirely or accepted with conditions. And they voted to accept us, Ironhawk said. All of us, including you. Relief flooded through Clara so powerfully she had to sit down on a fallen log before her legs gave out. What changed their minds? Falling rain, Ironhawk said. She spoke about your skills as a healer, your work with the children, the way you've tried to integrate rather than demand special treatment. And Bright Arrow, she argued that turning away people in need because we're afraid of consequences is the same as letting fear make our decisions for us. But Clara could hear the unspoken caveat in his voice. But there are conditions, Ironhawk continued. You can't just exist here passively. The Council wants you to contribute actively. They want you to teach healing skills to Confederation members, to help build bridges with any settlers who prove willing to negotiate, to demonstrate that your presence provides value that outweighs the risk. I can do that, Clara said immediately. I want to do that. And Ironhawk added, his expression growing more serious. If soldiers or settlers come specifically because of you, if your presence directly causes violence, the Council reserves the right to ask you to leave, to put the safety of the Confederation above one person. The words stung, but Clara couldn't argue with the logic. That's fair, she said quietly. Is it? Ironhawk sat beside her on the log. Asking you to prove your worth every day? To live knowing you could be expelled at any moment if the political situation changes? It's more than I had before, Clara said. It's a chance. I'll take it. Ironhawk took her hand, laced their fingers together. We'll take it, together. They're not evaluating just you, they're evaluating us, what we represent. Whether peace between peoples is possible or just a fantasy desperate people tell themselves. Clara looked at their joined hands. His darker, scarred from years of hard living, hers paler, but marked now with calluses and healing cuts from the journey. Two people who shouldn't fit together, who came from worlds designed to be enemies, who'd chosen each other anyway. No pressure then, she said. Ironhawk laughed, short and sharp. None at all. The first month in Confederation territory was harder than the journey. Clara worked from dawn until well past dark, teaching healing techniques to anyone who'd listen, treating injuries and illnesses, proving her value through relentless usefulness. She made mistakes, misread plants, forgot cultural protocols, accidentally offended people with assumptions left over from her settler upbringing. But she kept trying, kept showing up, kept offering what she had with open hands. Slowly, grudgingly, some people began to accept her. The mothers whose children she'd treated. The elders who appreciated her knowledge of settler medicine combined with traditional techniques. The young people who saw in her proof that the old boundaries didn't have to define the future. Others remained hostile. There were whispers when she passed, deliberate exclusion from certain gatherings. People who made it clear they tolerated her presence but would never approve of it. Clara learned to live with both. 3 months after their arrival, Colonel Morrison appeared at the Confederation border with a small escort and a message. The territorial governor wanted to meet with Confederation leadership to discuss a new treaty proposal. The council debated for 2 days whether to even respond. Treaties had been broken so many times that the word itself felt like a lie. But Bright Arrow argued that refusing to engage would be used as justification for military action, while meeting at least gave them information about what was coming. They agreed to send a delegation, and they insisted Clara be part of it. They want to see how we've integrated you, Bright Arrow explained when Clara protested. Want to understand whether cooperation between our peoples is actually possible or just a performance. I'm not a showpiece, Clara said. No, Bright Arrow agreed. You're a weapon. The question is whether you're their weapon or ours. The meeting was held at a fort 3 days' ride from Confederation territory. Neutral ground, theoretically, though the presence of 100 soldiers made neutrality feel like another lie. The territorial governor was a man named Marcus Thornton, with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Gentlemen, he said, then corrected himself when he saw Bright Arrow and Clara. And ladies, thank you for coming. I believe we have much to discuss regarding the future of this territory. The negotiations lasted hours. Thornton proposed a new treaty that would consolidate tribal lands into a smaller reservation, promising protection and supplies in exchange for giving up vast territories currently held under older agreements. The Confederation representatives countered with demands for enforced existing treaties, removal of illegal settlers from claimed lands, and genuine autonomy. Round and round they went, each side making offers they knew the other couldn't accept, dancing around the real issue. Nobody trusted anybody, and nobody was willing to be the first to back down. Finally, Thornton turned to Clara directly. Miss Whitlock, or should I say Mrs. Clara is fine, Clara said. Clara, then, you're a unique voice in these proceedings. A white woman who's chosen to live among these people. Tell me, do you think peace is possible? Real, lasting peace? It was a trap. Clara could see it clearly. If she said yes, she'd be dismissed as naive. If she said no, she'd be used as evidence that coexistence was impossible. Either way, her words would be twisted to serve Thornton's purposes. But she was tired of traps, tired of having to calculate every word for how it might be weaponized. I think peace is possible, Clara said clearly, but not the way you're proposing it. Thornton's eyebrows rose. Oh? And what's wrong with my proposal? It's built on the assumption that you have the right to dictate terms, Clara said, that your laws, your government, your vision of the future is the only legitimate one. You're not negotiating, you're demanding surrender and calling it compromise. We're offering protection, Thornton said, his smile hardening. Resources, structure, civilization. You're offering control, Clara corrected. The same control my uncle tried to exert over me, claiming it was for my own good while really being about power and property. I rejected it then. These people are rejecting it now. And calling that rejection unreasonable just proves you were never interested in actual peace. You think you understand how this works? Thornton leaned forward. You've been playing Indian for a few months, and you think you comprehend the complexities of territorial governance? I understand that people deserve to determine their own futures, Clara said. And I understand that every treaty you've offered has been broken when it became inconvenient. So, forgive me if I'm skeptical about this one. The room had gone silent. Clara could feel Ironhawk's tension beside her, could see Bright Arrow's carefully neutral expression, could sense the soldier's hands moving toward weapons. Thornton studied Clara for a long moment. Then he said, You've made yourself very clear, Mrs. Clara. I appreciate your honesty. He turned to the Confederation representatives. I believe we've gone as far as we can today. I'll take your counterproposal to the territorial legislature. They'll make the final decision about how to proceed. The delegation rode back to Confederation territory in tense silence. Clara kept expecting someone to yell at her for speaking so bluntly, for jeopardizing the negotiations, for letting her anger override diplomacy. Instead, Bright Arrow pulled her horse alongside Clara's and said quietly, That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Clara admitted. Thornton will use your words against us, Bright Arrow continued. We'll paint the Confederation as influenced by a radical white woman who's turned against her own people. I know. But, Bright Arrow said, and something like approval entered her voice, you also said things that needed saying, things we couldn't say without being dismissed as savages who don't understand civilized discourse. Coming from you, a settler who chose to leave that world, it carries different weight. Will it matter? Clara asked. Probably not, Bright Arrow said honestly. Thornton will do what he was always going to do, but at least now it's documented that we tried, that we offered real alternatives, that we didn't just roll over and accept whatever scraps they offered. 2 weeks later, Colonel Morrison arrived again, this time with bad news. The territorial legislature had rejected the Confederation's counterproposal. They were giving tribal groups 30 days to voluntarily relocate to the designated reservation. After that, the Army would enforce relocation by whatever means necessary. War was coming. Everyone knew it. The only question was how bad it would be. The Confederation Council met in emergency session. Some argued for immediate armed resistance. Others advocated for strategic retreat, moving farther west to buy time. A few suggested accepting the terms and hoping to negotiate better conditions from within the reservation system. Clara sat in on the meeting at Bright Arrow's request, expected to observe but not speak. She watched people she'd come to respect argue about impossible choices, saw the weight of responsibility crushing everyone who had to decide which path led to the least amount of death. There might be another option, Clara said finally, unable to stay silent. Every eye turned to her. Bright Arrow gestured for her to continue. What if we don't fight and we don't surrender? Clara said, the idea forming as she spoke. What if we create something new? Something that exists in the spaces your laws and their laws don't quite cover? Explain, Grey Cloud said. The territory's full of people who don't fit anywhere, Clara said. White settlers who've married into tribal families. Mixed children who aren't accepted by either side. Former soldiers who are tired of fighting. Traders who work between both worlds. People like me who've chosen to cross boundaries that aren't supposed to be crossable. She took a breath. What if we created a settlement specifically for those people? A place that's neither a reservation nor white town, but something different. A community built on the principle that the old categories don't have to apply anymore. They'll never allow it, one of the elders said. Maybe not, Clara agreed. But maybe they won't bother stopping it either. We're talking about people both sides have already written off as problems. What if we gather all the problems in one place and let us solve ourselves? That's not a solution, another council member objected. That's just organized chaos. Better than disorganized chaos, Falling Rain said quietly, and better than the alternatives being offered. The debate continued for hours, but Clara could see the idea taking root. Not with everyone. Some dismissed it as fantasy. Others saw it as surrender by another name. But enough people saw the possibility, the thin thread of hope it offered, that by the time the meeting ended, the council had voted to try. The next month was a blur of activity. They identified a location, a valley, technically on Confederation land, but far enough from the main settlements to provide buffer space. They sent messengers to scattered families, mixed couples, people living in the margins, offering them a place to belong. They negotiated with Morrison for a fragile truce while the experiment played out. Clara worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life, planning layouts, organizing supply chains, mediating disputes between people who spoke different languages and came from wildly different traditions. It was exhausting and frustrating and frequently felt impossible. It was also the most important thing she'd ever done. The settlement started small, 20 families in the first wave, living in temporary structures and learning to navigate cultural differences that sometimes seemed too vast to bridge. There were fights, misunderstandings, moments when the whole enterprise seemed doomed to collapse. But there were also breakthroughs. A white farmer teaching irrigation techniques to tribal families who taught him in return about crop rotation methods he'd never considered. A former soldier who'd married a Confederation woman, helping build defensive positions that satisfied both military efficiency and traditional spiritual considerations. Children playing together, creating their own hybrid language that drew from all their parents' tongues. Swift Rabbit thrived in the new settlement. He'd found a group of mixed children like himself, not quite one thing or another, but uniquely themselves. He still brought Clara his rocks, still followed her around sometimes, but he'd also found his own place in the world. His father even approached Clara one evening, awkward and clearly uncomfortable. "My son speaks well of you," he said haltingly. "Says you've been kind to him, patient." "He's a good boy," Clara said carefully. "He is," the father agreed. I've been angry for so long. At the settlers, at the world, at myself for not protecting his mother. I took it out on you because you were there and white, and it was easier than dealing with the real sources of my pain." "I understand," Clara said. "I don't know if you do," the man said, "but I'm trying to learn. Trying to be better, for him, if nothing else." He paused. "Thank you for seeing him when I couldn't. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It wasn't friendship. But it was acknowledgement, and that mattered." 6 months after the settlement's founding, Colonel Morrison requested a meeting with Clara and the settlement's informal council. They met in the structure that served as both meeting hall and community center, tension thick enough to cut. "I'll be direct," Morrison said. "The territorial governor is receiving pressure from settlers who want this land. They're arguing that the settlement represents a security risk, that mixing populations creates loyalty questions, that the whole experiment should be shut down." Clara's heart sank. And I've been arguing the opposite," Morrison said, surprising everyone. "I've been reporting that the settlement is actually reducing tensions, that it's providing a release valve for people who don't fit neatly into either category, that it's working against all odds and expectations." "Why would you do that?" Bright Arrow asked suspiciously. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm tired of fighting wars that solve nothing. Because I've watched this territory bleed for years, and I'd like to see if there's another way. Because," he looked at Clara directly, "because watching you people make this work against every obstacle proves that maybe the old ways aren't the only ways." "So we can stay?" Clara asked. "For now," Morrison said. "But you need to keep proving it works. Keep showing that integration is possible, that mixed communities can be stable, that people from different worlds can build something together. He stood to leave. And for what it's worth, Mrs. Clara, I think what you've done here is remarkable. Foolish, probably doomed to fail eventually, but remarkable nonetheless. After Morrison left, the council sat in silence, processing what they'd just heard. He's right about one thing, Falling Rain said finally. We need to keep proving this works. Every day, in every interaction. The moment we stop, the moment we give them an excuse to shut us down, it's over. Then we don't give them an excuse, Clara said. The settlement continued to grow. By the end of the first year, they had over 60 families, a working school that taught in multiple languages, a trading post that did business with both Confederation and settler communities, and a reputation as the strange place where the impossible somehow kept happening. It wasn't perfect. There were still fights, still cultural clashes, still people who left because they couldn't handle the constant negotiation required to make it work. Redstone sent word once, a message carried by a trader that said simply, "Still waiting for it to collapse. Still hope I'm wrong." Clara understood. She was waiting for the collapse too, in a way. Waiting for the moment when the fragile peace they'd built would shatter and prove all the skeptics right. But days turned into months, turned into years, and the settlement persisted. Children grew up speaking 3 languages and thinking nothing of it. Families merged and blended and created new traditions that honored multiple heritages. The community developed its own identity, neither fully tribal nor fully settler, but uniquely itself. Clara's role shifted over time. She was still a healer, still a teacher, but she'd also become something like a mediator, someone who understood multiple perspectives and could help translate not just words but concepts, values, worldviews. It was exhausting work, but it mattered. Her relationship with Ironhawk deepened too. They built a home together, literal and metaphorical, creating space where both could be fully themselves. They argued sometimes, still worked through the wounds they'd both carried into their marriage, still had moments of doubt and fear, but they also had moments of joy. Quiet evenings by the fire, shared laughter over cooking disasters, the steady comfort of waking up beside someone who knew all your damage and chose you anyway. 3 years after the settlement's founding, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified her, brought back memories of her mother, of the violence that had destroyed her first family, of all the ways the world could still break what you loved most. But it also filled her with fierce determination. This child would grow up in a world where boundaries weren't absolute, where different peoples could coexist, where hope was more than just a fantasy. She'd make sure of it. The birth was difficult. Clara lost more blood than was safe, hovered in that space between life and death for hours while Falling Rain and other healers worked to save her. When she finally surfaced, weak but alive, the first thing she saw was Ironhawk's face, tears streaming down his cheeks, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft hide. "A daughter," he said hoarsely. "We have a daughter." Clara reached for this baby with trembling hands. The infant was perfect, impossibly small, with Clara's pale skin and Ironhawk's dark eyes and a future that stretched out uncertain and full of possibility. "What should we call her?" Clara whispered. Ironhawk was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Hope. In my language, it's Taki. In yours, Hope. Let her carry both, always." They called her Taki Hope, and she grew up wild and loved in the settlement that had become home. She played with children who spoke different languages, learned healing from Clara and tracking from Ironhawk, and absorbed the lesson that the world was bigger and more complicated than any single story could contain. Swift Rabbit, now 12 and certain he'd be a warrior, appointed himself her protector. He'd sit beside her cradle and tell her long, rambling stories about his rock collection, about the journey he barely remembered, about the white woman who'd been kind when she didn't have to be. 5 years after Taki's birth, the territorial governor changed and new pressures emerged. The settlement faced challenges: legal questions about land ownership, disputes over jurisdiction, settlers who wanted the valley for farming, tribal groups who worried about losing young people to the mixed community. But they'd built something strong enough to withstand pressure. The settlement had proven its value, demonstrated that cooperation was possible, created a model that other communities were starting to cautiously replicate. Clara stood one evening at the edge of the settlement, watching the sun set over the valley they'd turned into home. Taki played nearby with a group of children, their laughter bright in the cooling air. Ironhawk worked on repairing a fence, his movements steady and sure. Falling Rain appeared beside Clara, her hair more silver now, but her eyes still sharp. "You've done well," Falling Rain said quietly. "We've done well," Clara corrected. "All of us. Together." "Do you ever regret it?" Falling Rain asked. "The choice to stay? Everything you gave up?" Clara thought about her family, buried in ashes 300 miles away. Thought about the life she might have had if none of this had happened. Marriage to some settler farmer, children who never learned another language, a world bounded by fear and familiar horizons. "No," she said honestly. "I regret what I lost. I grieve for my family every day. But the choice to stay, to build this, to become who I am now?" She shook her head. "That I don't regret." "Even knowing it's still fragile?" Falling Rain pressed. "That the wrong governor or the wrong incident could destroy everything we've built?" "Nothing's permanent," Clara said. "The settlement I grew up in is gone. The camp where I first arrived is abandoned. Even this place will change, eventually, but that doesn't make it meaningless. We're proving something important here, that the old hatreds don't have to define the future, that people can choose connection over division. That's worth protecting, even if it's temporary." Falling Rain nodded slowly. "My brother chose well when he agreed to the trade. Better than any of us knew." "I chose well too," Clara said, watching Ironhawk approach with Taki on his shoulders. "Even when I didn't know I was choosing." That night, the settlement held a gathering to celebrate the harvest and mark another year survived. People from different backgrounds shared food, traded stories, argued good-naturedly about whose traditions were better, and generally proved that coexistence was messy and complicated and absolutely possible. Clara sat with Ironhawk, Taki asleep in her lap, and watched the community they'd helped build. Swift Rabbit was teaching younger children a game he'd invented. Bright Arrow was deep in discussion with a settler farmer about shared water rights. Families mingled and mixed, creating bonds that defied the categories everyone else insisted on maintaining. "You know what I think?" Clara said to Ironhawk. "What?" "I think we're going to be okay. Not perfect, not without struggle, but okay. We've built something stronger than fear, something that matters." Ironhawk pulled her closer. "I think you're an optimist." "I think I'm a realist," Clara corrected. "I've seen the worst. I've lived through violence and loss and people determined to destroy anything that challenges their worldview. But I've also seen this, people choosing to be better, to build instead of tear down, to believe in possibilities instead of limitations." She looked up at him. "That's not optimism. That's evidence." Years later, when Clara was old and her daughter was grown with children of her own, people would ask about the settlement's founding. They'd want to hear the story made neat and simple, with clear heroes and villains, with obvious lessons and tidy resolutions. Clara never gave them that version. She told the messy truth instead, about fear and mistakes and people who meant well but got things wrong, about choices made without knowing where they'd lead, about bridges built from desperate hope and stubborn refusal to accept that hatred was inevitable. She told them about Swift Rabbit and his rocks, about Falling Rain's reluctant acceptance, about Redstone's anger that proved sometimes the gap was too wide to bridge. She told them about Colonel Morrison, who chose to support something he didn't fully understand because he was tired of the alternative, about her own journey from captive to healer to something like a leader, always uncertain, always afraid, always trying anyway. But mostly, she told them about what happened when people decided that the old boundaries didn't have to define the future. When they chose connection over separation, when they built communities based on shared humanity instead of shared bloodlines, when they proved that peace was possible if you were willing to work for it every single day. The settlement still existed decades later, grown into a small town with its own distinct identity. It faced challenges, economic pressures, political opposition, internal conflicts that never fully resolved. But it persisted, stubborn and imperfect and real. And in the center of town, carved into a stone that Swift Rabbit himself had selected years ago, were words in 3 languages that said the same thing. Here we built something new, not perfect, but ours, together. Clara lived long enough to see her grandchildren grow up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable moving between worlds their grandparents had been told should never mix. She lived to see some of her fears realized, new conflicts, broken promises, moments when the old hatred surged back. But she also lived to see her hopes realized too, communities that took the settlement's model and ran with it, Generations who couldn't imagine why the boundaries had ever seemed so absolute. A slow, grinding progress toward something better. On her last evening, sitting on the porch of the home she'd shared with Ironhawk for over 40 years, Clara watched the sun set over the valley one final time. Taki sat beside her, now a grandmother herself, holding her hand with the same gentle strength Clara had learned from falling rain all those years ago. "Was it worth it?" Taki asked quietly. "Everything you gave up, everything you fought for, was it worth it?" Clara looked at her daughter, this beautiful, strong woman who existed because a scared girl had chosen to stay instead of run, had chosen to build instead of hide, had chosen to believe that the world could be different than what everyone said it had to be. "Yes," Clara said simply. "Every day of it, every struggle, every doubt, every moment I thought it would all fall apart. Worth it." She thought about the girl she'd been, covered in ash, stumbling through the wreckage of her first family. Thought about the woman she'd become. Healer, bridge builder, mother, survivor. Thought about all the choices between those 2 points. The fears she'd faced down. The hope she'd built from scraps and determination. She thought about Ironhawk, gone now 5 years but still present in every corner of this home they'd made. About the family they'd created together, not just Taki, but the extended network of people they'd pulled into orbit. The community that had become clan. "Tell them," Clara said to her daughter. "When I'm gone and they ask what it was like, tell them it was hard, tell them it was scary, tell them there were moments I wanted to give up, moments I didn't think I could keep going. And then," Taki prompted. "And then tell them I did keep going," Clara said. "That we all did. That we built something that mattered out of ashes and anger and the stubborn belief that people deserve better than the cycles of violence we inherit. Tell them it's possible. Messy, imperfect, fragile, but possible." She closed her eyes, feeling the evening breeze on her face, hearing the sounds of the settlement, children playing, families gathering for the evening meal, the ordinary sounds of a community that shouldn't have existed but did. "Tell them," Clara whispered, "that choosing hope doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means deciding that reality doesn't get the last word on what's possible. Tell them that." Taki squeezed her hand. "I will, Mama. I promise." Clara smiled and let herself drift, comfortable in the knowledge that what they'd built would outlast her, would change and adapt and maybe even fail eventually. But it had existed. It had mattered, and that was enough. In the end, that was always enough. To have tried, to have built, to have proven that the boundaries everyone insisted were absolute could be crossed after all. To have lived a life that served as evidence that a different future was possible, if people were brave enough to reach for it. Clara Whitlock died peacefully that night, surrounded by family that spanned worlds and defied categories, in a home that existed because she'd refused to accept that fear had to win. And the settlement she'd helped build kept growing, kept evolving, kept proving that sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing to believe that people can be better than their history demands. The peace is worth working for, even when it seems impossible. That the bridges we build between different worlds might be fragile and imperfect, but they're also the only path forward worth taking. Years later, historians would argue about the settlement's significance, its successes and failures, its role in the larger sweep of territorial history. But for the people who lived there, who grew up speaking multiple languages and honoring multiple traditions, who knew that belonging didn't require choosing only one identity, for them, the settlement was simply home. And in the center of town, Swift Rabbit's carefully chosen stone still stood, weathered by time but enduring, carrying its message in 3 languages. Here we built something new, not perfect, but ours, together. It was the truth Clara had lived, the legacy she'd left, and the hope she'd passed on to generations who would carry it forward into futures she couldn't imagine but had helped make possible. And if that wasn't victory, it was close enough.